This is the regular meeting of the Encinitas City Council. It's Wednesday, June 9, 2021 at 6:41 p.m. May we please have a roll call?
Yes, Councilmember Hensy. Here. Councilmember Lyons.
Here.
Councilmember Mosca.
Here.
Deputy
I'm
Mayor
here.
Kranz.
Here.
And Mayor Blakespear.
Here.
Record will show that all members of the City Council are present.
Okay, thank you. I invite you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next we have our presentation of the declaration of June as Pride Month. I'm very excited about being able to present this to, I think we have Lisa Nava, who's going to be accepting it. Is that true? Is she here? I will read it and see if do you see her, City Clerk?
I don't see her. I'm looking in the other, so I don't see her.
Okay. Well, let's see if she comes on. And if not, then Councilmember Mosca can accept it. How's that?
Sounds good.
Okay. So this is a proclamation. So as we celebrate and declare June as Pride Month in Encinitas, we are reminded that this June we stand with the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community in Encinitas as they declare their own pride in who they are and who they love. And now there are a series of whereases. So whereas, as the city of Encinitas has a diverse lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community, and it is committed to supporting visibility, dignity, and equality for all people in the community. And whereas, many of the residents, students, employees, and business owners within the city of Encinitas who contribute greatly to the enrichment of our city are a part of the LGBTQ community. And whereas, though there has been remarkable progress toward equality in recent years, members of the LGBTQ community in the United States and around the world still face an unacceptable level of discrimination and violence. And therefore, it is important for cities such as the city of Encinitas to stand up and show support for those affected. Whereas our nation was founded on the principle of equal rights for all people, but the fulfillment of this promise has been long in coming for many Americans. And whereas some of the most inspiring moments in our history have arisen from civil rights movements that have sought to bring marginalized communities to the mainstream of American society. And whereas on June 28, 1969, at the Stonewall Inn in New York City, a courageous group of citizens rose up against harassment and mistreatment, setting in motion a chain of events that would become known as the Stonewall Riots and the birth of the modern LGBTQ civil rights movement. And whereas LGBTQ pride celebrations have taken place around the country every June to commemorate this historic turning point in our civil rights history, when citizens fought against discriminatory criminal laws that have since been declared unconstitutional. Whereas the North County LGBTQ Resource Center was founded in 2008, along with its North County Pride, also called Pride by the Beach, and has been an advocate for equality and inclusiveness while providing valuable support and life-saving services in all the North County region. Whereas the North County LGBTQ Resource Center founded and has hosted North County Pride events in Oceanside every year since 2007. And this year, Pride by the Beach will be held as a virtual event on Saturday, June 12th from 11 to 1 p.m. for the raising of the Pride flag. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Catherine Blakespear, Mayor of the City of Encinitas, and the Encinitas City Council for the City of Encinitas, on behalf of all residents of the City of Encinitas, do hereby proclaim this month of June as LGBTQ Pride Month in the City of Encinitas, and invite everyone to respect, honor, and celebrate our diverse community and to continue building a culture of inclusiveness and acceptance for the LGBTQ community. So I'm excited that we raised our flag already at our City Hall. We were the first one in North County to do that 3 years ago, and we've done it every year. And I will hand this proclamation virtually to my council colleague, Councilmember Mosca, because I don't see Lisa Nava on the phone, but I'll let you take it from here, council member.
I'm very excited to receive this on behalf of the North County LGBT Resource Center I'm a volunteer for the center. I'm also a member of the LGBTQ family. And so I'm honored to receive this, this proclamation on their behalf. They are a center that's doing some really terrific stuff in North County. They're providing much needed resources for LGBTQ family and community, and they're also advocating on our behalf. And so, so this is something that I think that it's very fitting that they receive. Very excited as well that this is the third year that we've kind of hoisted the pride flag at our city hall. And this is actually the first year that we're hoisting the new flag, which is the Progress Pride flag, which acknowledges our transgender community and our members of our colored communities as well. I think it's a very, very important statement, especially at this moment in time to make. You know, as we kind of look toward the future, definitely there are lots of advocacy that needs to happen in the area of transgender and communities of color. But you know, pride for people, you know, means different things, and so I don't want to say that I have the kind of you know, what it means for me is what it means for everybody. But for me, pride is really about, you know, the progress that we've made toward equality for all, and really kind of thinking about the rights that we've won over the years, and the champions and leaders that have stood up for equality and have helped us make that progress. It's about taking stock of where we're at right now, and thinking about the future. And so really, I appreciate this certificate, and I'll give it over to the Resource Center of North County. And I'm sure that they're going to be honored to have it as well. So thank you so much. You know, it makes me really proud to be from this community, that we're such a welcoming community, and that we're really striving to do our part to you know, just make this union even more perfect union. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for those heartfelt words. All right, we will go now to the rest of our agenda. So we did not have closed session, but we first have oral communications. So let's go to oral communications.
And we do have 7 speakers. Our first speaker is Cindy Cremona. And just a reminder, everyone has 3 minutes. And just remember to unmute your microphone.
Thanks, Kathy. Mayor and Council, I was shocked to find out recently that the new Equity Committee is costing residents $35,000 for consultants, as well as $200 per hour for consulting services. I understood the city claimed that this committee would be put together without cost to the residents. Why, if the city picked 8 residents with equity experience to serve on the committee, and the mayor and council member Hinsey are experienced equity activists, are you spending money on this committee for consultants, especially at a time when the city doesn't have the funding for other projects and you are borrowing $20 million for streetscape? I find it interesting that the city will spend residents' tax dollars on inessential committees and programs at a time when the city is still recovering from revenue losses due to the COVID pandemic, but is loath to defend the rights of its residents when it comes to fighting egregious developments, or HCD. One must shake one's head and wonder, when the city claims one thing, does another, and believes that residents are not smart enough to recognize when they are being lied to. Thank you.
Our next speaker.
Madam Mayor, can we, I didn't know there was an expenditure on that equity committee. What is the, how is that happening?
Does the city manager want to respond to that?
Sure, thank you, Deputy Mayor Kranz. We did make a decision to staff our Equity and Inclusion Committee with a professional facilitator. As you might imagine, this is a very important committee with the discussions around social justice, et cetera. And while all of our committee members have an interest in equity and inclusion, I probably would not say that any of them are experts in terms of that actual field. So we brought in a diversity, equity, and inclusion facilitator, and our contract is up to a maximum of $35,000. That's not the minimum, it's the maximum that we would spend. And I did that under my contracting authority in the city manager's office.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Mark Wilcox. Mark, you can start when ready.
Okay, is that unmuted?
Yes, it is.
Great, thank you. Hello, Encinitas City Council. My name is Mark Wilcox. I would first like to express my condolences to the Joy Hubbard's family. I came tonight because I know that the City Council, its staff, and citizens like me will be affected by the expensive and troublesome permitting of marijuana businesses in Encinitas. As difficult as that will be, there are other consequences, and these are especially for youth. Marijuana businesses bring more aggressive advertising and the sale of products that especially target youth. One of these products are look-alike THC treats, which indiscernibly resemble popular candies like Skittles. Recently, William Wrigley Jr. Company, owned by Mars Inc., filed suit in May against 5 marijuana companies, 2 of which are in California, for selling cannabis-infused edibles that look like Skittles, Starburst, and Lifesavers. Let this sink in for just a moment. Though the suit focuses on intellectual property rights, the plaintiffs also argue that the copycat pot products could lead people, particularly children, to mistakenly ingest drugs or equate very dangerous marijuana products with an innocuous treat. And these products are no mistake. The accessibility of edibles and the secrecy they afford have made them the fastest growing category in marijuana products, according to a cannabis data analytics company, who estimate that edibles have outpaced the growth of the rest of the cannabis market by 29% in the last 3 months. The public health concerns are huge and bring to mind the nefarious marketing techniques of the tobacco industry, who used cartoons to target children. Mars Wrigley Company wrote, quote, "They strongly condemn the use of our popular candy brands in the marketing and sale of THC products, which is grossly deceptive and irresponsible. The use of Mars Wrigley's brands in this manner is unauthorized, inappropriate, and must cease," end quote. As a father, grandfather, and youth leader, I am concerned that we will see egregious marijuana manufacturers in Encinitas who put profits over people and target our underage children. It's up to us to protect the vulnerable, who are, by the way, underage children. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Christine Schindler. Christine, you can start when ready.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, very good. So I wanted to say happy Pride Month and acknowledge the fact that you're flying the flag and doing a proclamation. And very nice what you said, Councilmember Joe. I also just wanted to give an update as far as a concern in the community that has been voiced a lot on social media, next door, here and there, e-bike safety. So I wanted to mention some things that have, I guess I should back up and say Christine Schindler from East Encinitas. I am a co-chair with Bike Walk Encinitas, but I'm talking on my own behalf. So there are a flurry of things that are happening in North County around e-bike safety that will benefit Encinitas. We spent this past weekend on Sunday filming a safety video with the San Diego County Bike Coalition that was specific to e-bike safety. And that will be, I think, ready at the beginning of July to share across our community in hopes of getting more encouragement for safe law-abiding behaviors and choices. And then we also did some outreach to middle schools, started the process and certainly need to do more at the beginning of the next school year, but we had the sheriffs and a person from Charlie's e-bike go to Oak Crest Middle School. Councilmember Kelly was there. to be involved and to witness the education that was provided. And so I just want to acknowledge the participation of Gary Rivers with the Sheriff's Department and the folks at Charlie's e-bike for doing that outreach. That touched every student. It was not a student-wide assembly, but it was done in shifts. And basically the information that was shared was provided to each of those students. Hopefully there are lots of open ears and it does change behaviors. We realize we also need to get the message out to the parents that are buying the e-bikes for many of these kids, and to also adult e-bike riders. So I just wanted to acknowledge the part of the city, the part of the Sheriff's Department, the San Diego County Bike Coalition, and people like myself that are league cycling instructors that are focusing on e-bike safety. Two other things that are in the works. The city of Carlsbad is also concerned about this, and they came up with a very simple brochure. And I think it's going to be available for other jurisdictions to adopt with a small spend to be able to brand it for our city. So I'll pursue that in the coming days when that gets finalized. And thank you so much for your support.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mike Grace.
Good evening, City Council. Last month at the Planning Commission, I was one of 14 citizens asking questions regarding the implementation of Measure H, because it was and still is missing a lot of information that citizens need. I had asked, how will I find out where these marijuana retail shops are going to be located in Encinitas? Are they going to be in the local strip malls? Are they going to be next to my gym? Where will the kitchens go? Are they going to be? How will the distribution work? How will the odors from cultivation sites be contained and mitigated? And most importantly, how will these Measure 8 provisions be enforced? My ask from the Planning Commission was that they recommend to the City Council to please hold public workshops so we, the public, the parents, the business owners, the local shoppers can have answers to these questions in a thorough and transparent manner. Citizens need to know how this measure is going to affect us. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Barbara Gordon.
Thank you very much. Good evening, City Council members. My name is Barbara Gordon. I'm here tonight in hopes the City Council will listen to the community's concerns with the staff report regarding the new marijuana ordinance, especially dealing with marijuana cultivation grow sites, as they will have significant impact on the environment. High water usage when we are already in extreme drought conditions, odor, pesticides, fungicides, and other chemicals used that will be drifting into neighboring communities. All are problematic. Right now in Encinitas, there are residents who are dealing with serious health problems associated with drifting chemicals. Residents should not have to tolerate any odor or drifting chemicals used from these businesses. The quality of life for those impacted cannot be underestimated or dismissed by the city. There will be direct and indirect consequences to the environment with marijuana cultivation. Do not fool yourself into thinking there will be no effect on the environment. We should not be accommodating the marijuana industry while sacrificing the residents or our environment. I respectfully request that the city's pre-existing municipal code language clearly address the problems associated with odor and other environmental issues to protect all residents. The marijuana industry is all about big money and does not have the best interest of Encinitas or its residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Natalie Setun. Natalie, you can start when ready.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good evening. My name is Natalie, and I have been a resident of Park Place for the past 10 years, where as a single mom, I chose to raise my 2 daughters in a safe community where they would receive quality education and enjoy a quality of life with minimal crime. I have served my community by choosing to work at the San Diego Food Bank. Both of my daughters also contributed as local taxpayers when working at Flashbacks and Encinitas. We also consistently vote. I am requesting that the incident I was a victim of this weekend be considered in your vote to extend the hotel vouchers that seem to make Encinitas a comfortable community for the homeless and subsequently attract people who live in an alternative lifestyle by living in vehicles parked on our residential communities. This weekend, I exited my home at 11:20 on Saturday morning, and I was accosted on my front lawn by an enraged adult male. I've never seen him before. He rushed out of his vehicle he appears to live in on a public street outside of my home, verbally cursing me and threatening to watch my home and steal from me. He then lowered his pants, exposing his genitals and buttocks. The photos are attached. The degree of violence, screaming, drew my neighbors outside to witness this abusive conduct. It was my neighbor's quick action that thwarted my physical assault. The sheriff's department was immediately notified and an arrest warrant was issued. I was granted a restraining order. I am requesting that the blurred photograph be included as a public exhibit and including the photograph, the graphic unedited version for council consideration. The sheriff's department relayed that they are subject to limitations with people who choose to live in vehicles. To support this, I could not even have the restraining order served on a mobile vehicle, even though it was routinely parked outside of my residence. My minor daughter experienced numerous incidents involving the increased community of homeless under the influence of drugs and alcohol in the vicinity of Flashbacks. She also experienced violent outbursts from the homeless in and outside of Flashbacks. On one occasion, she had to clean blood off of the countertop following a particularly violent outburst. The frequency and nature of these incidents seems to be increasing since I chose to live here. The progressive decline of a safe quality of life in Encinitas and Cardiff has been rapid. It is my position that approval of these vouchers will increasingly make our community one that subjects tax-paying residents to potentially violent crimes, such as the one I experienced this weekend. When services needed by the homeless are not cumulatively available in Encinitas, it shifts their need onto community residents, pandering, loitering, trespassing, stealing, and urinating, defecating on private property, as well as committing crimes against residents becomes all too common. All of these come with resulting fiscal expense and all of the increasing responsibility of community taxpayers. It is my position that the council has a duty to try to represent and serve the city and its residents. Continuing the voucher program directly betrays that duty. The council should prioritize the well-being of the tax-paying community members they have promised to represent before making accommodations to those who have no regard for the consequences of their actions. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final speaker under oral communications is Geraldine Kessler.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, hang on. I just gotta. Okay, here we go. I would like to speak about the Staver Housing Project on Melba. I wanted to let you know that I spoke with Brian Staver, the designated spokesperson for the developer and the owner of the property, about the 31 homes he will be able to put on the property based on the density bonus law, AB 2345, or whatever it is. There's so many every day, I can't keep track. Although he's very approachable and well-mannered, he just does not understand the significance of the beautiful piece of property that he holds and the incredible ecosystem the property has to offer the entire Encinitas community. He just does not get it, and that saddened me even more. He's clearly not an environmentalist and quite possibly may have skipped a generation of having the environmental conscious gene that was ever present in prior family members who lived on the land or in the area. He's not passionate about preserving this land for the neighborhood and has not even considered what sadness it brings us all, knowing that homes will be placed on it. When talking to him, we saw several monarch butterflies and beautiful birds on the property as we stood in front of the historical home built in 1943, which is slated to be torn down. The fact that he is having a hard time figuring out where the runoff will go from the 31 homes on the project should be a major clue that the project does not work out for the land. Plus, many other environmental issues have appeared in the process of planning the 31 homes. It's a sign the land is giving loud and clear, not meant for homes. My hope is that the council will help the community preserve this land. The property abuts Oak Crest School, Boys and Girls Club, and the community center, which will all be drastically impacted by the 31 homes. Please, I am asking the mayor and council to look for ways that the community could work in preserving this property. Please try to find federal government money, grant money for this, if any is out there, or perhaps there is money in the Parks and Rec budget to assist with preservation of the property. It is also an ideal satellite location for the botanical gardens with a community garden on site and learning lab. I ask you to tap into your environmental conscious gene that hopefully has not skipped a generation like Brian Saber. Thank you for listening.
Mayor, that does conclude oral communications.
Okay, thank you very much. We do not have a report from closed session.
Correct. We do not have any changes to the posted agenda. And so far for the consent calendar, Councilmember Lyons was pulling item 8D, and members of the public have pulled item 8H and 8J.
Okay, and I would like to pull 8K.
Okay. Okay.
I will move to approve the remaining consent agenda items.
Von Mosca, second.
Okay. Councilmember Hensy.
Yes.
Councilmember Lyons.
Yes.
Councilmember Mosca.
I vote yes.
Deputy Mayor Kranz.
Yes.
And Mayor Blakespear.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously. So we will move to item 8D.
May I start?
Yes, you may.
Okay, thank you. This is the award of the Urban Forest Consulting Arborist Service contract, and I'm in support of it. I just would like to include 2 recommendations in my motion. What I'd like to do is present that motion, and then if there's some questions, if there's a second and some questions, I'm totally able to shed some more light on it. So what I'd like to do is move to approve consent item 8D, which is the arborist contract, with 2 recommendations. I've spoken with our Public Works Director, Zmira, and our City Manager, Antil. And the first recommendation is to direct the City Public Works Department to add to the scope of work, item 23, to add city projects to the review of the development plan checks for approval, and to add review for conformance with the urban forestry approved street species master list and tree plan for spacing to the tree removals and replacement. So essentially that recommendation is to modify the scope of work, item number 23, to include those items I listed. I'm happy to go over it again if anyone.
So let me just ask if it might be easier to pull this item and have you work with staff and put together a proposal for consent that meets your needs. And if not, then you can elevate that to the council. But I mean, because I don't know if it's hard for them to evaluate this on the fly, but it certainly is for me. But I don't know what the city manager thinks about that idea, or you, Councilmember Lyons.
I'm happy to go either way on that. I would just like the opportunity to add these 2 recommendations.
Okay, city manager.
So our preference would not be that council members provide administrative direction, as Councilmember Lyons and I talked about. I think we have an understanding of how we can revise the language to make it more clear in terms of the responsibilities of the arborist contract. So I think we actually can either bring this back to consent at the next meeting or take it up and add it later, either way. But I feel like Councilmember Lyons has told both of us what it is that she's looking for.
Okay. I mean, I'm going to call on, I'll come back to this, but let me call on the deputy mayor first.
Yeah, thanks. You know, she's an expert, Councilmember Lyons, in this particular field. So something tells me that it's a good idea, but at the same time, she is a member of a body that approves things that I'm a little uneasy kicking it to her to say, here, put this the way you want it. I think that we have professional staff and you know, the opportunity to discuss and make changes is at a council meeting in public. So my preference would be to have it back on an agenda with whatever it is that she is recommending more completely spelled out. And it sounds pretty reasonable, but you know, for me, it would be better to have it in writing and understand exactly what is being proposed.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the point is that if she does have expertise and if she recommends that we do things differently, and for whatever reason, the current professional staff doesn't see that as a good idea, she has the opportunity to elevate this for our consideration. So we can talk about.
Mayor, if I could, it's not that we didn't agree with Councilwoman Lyons. I think we feel that that the contract already includes the language. I thought that was actually where we landed on this earlier today. And we're delighted whenever we talk with Councilwoman Lyons about her expertise. What I don't want to get in the habit of is for council members to, and I think Councilwoman Lyons completely understands the discussion that we had earlier today, is just providing that direction directly to staff.
So would you prefer Councilmember Lyons to do a council member initiated item and have this come back, or do you feel, or you know, what is your preference on it?
No, I thought we had actually resolved the issue. So what I would suggest is if we didn't, that we'll bring it back and take another look at the language.
And City Manager Antel, Interim Director Demura and I spoke, and he kind of illuminated for me some dots that could be connected to further clarify what the expectation would be for the arborist. And it's more of an evolution of the role of the arborist now that we have achieved some of the major documents, you know, the urban forest tree guide and some other documents. So we've done that. And now we need to connect some other dots with how do we implement that? And that kind of comes in broader than public works. That comes maybe in more with the planning department and development services, because if there's these great documents we have that are essentially kind of on the shelf digitally, but we're not making sure that they're being integrated into our development process, and we want to make sure we tie up that loose end a little bit now. So it's perhaps under public works a little bit as far as clarity of what the scope of work says, but there might be also an element that's outside of public works that has more to do with how are we implementing this so that we make sure that trees that are too big aren't planted in spaces that are too small and create problems for us later, that kind of thing.
Right. I mean, so you have all those ideas and insights. So the point is, like, this is on consent. So, you know, you can pull it and say, I'd like to work with staff on this and see if it could come back. You can do a council member initiated item. You could say, I think my meeting with the staff went I understand it better and I'm happy to support this. I mean, so part of it is just like, how are you using the vehicle of this council meeting to try to go in the direction you want to go? So, you've pulled it now. So the question is like, what are we doing right now? So what would you like to do right now?
I'm feeling like I'm hearing that the most effective way to do this is to pull it from the agenda and continue the dialogue and come back with it.
I mean, that's what I would say.
Okay. That would be how I will approach it.
Okay, so basically you're recommending pulling it, and
yes,
and then I think the clerk will say we need to vote on that, right?
We can either make a motion, or if there's consensus to pull it from this agenda and bring it back, we can do that as well.
I'll go ahead and make the motion.
Okay.
I'm fine without a motion. I'm fine. I'm fine with pulling it and the councilwoman working with staff to see if they can come to more of a consensus.
I'm fine with that too. Did you want to say something more, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I just want to have clarity on exactly what we're, the word is at the tip of my tongue. We're setting a precedent here. And I guess what you're saying is that council members can just have items pulled and work with city staff to have them rewritten the way they want them. I guess that's my concern.
I mean, I don't think we really have a problem with the way we operate. I think we have a new council member who's bringing her perspective and trying to figure out how she can make a difference. And so, this is like square in the middle of her expertise, and she sees that the contract is written in a way that could be improved. It doesn't seem to me like this is an area ripe for abuse. I mean, any council member could be pulling all the time, but, we all figure out like how it is that we're able to accomplish things and to elevate things that need discussion. So, it happens in multiple ways. And if this is on the consent calendar and she wants to pull it as one vote, I'm happy to support her doing that. You don't have to do that. I don't feel like it's creating precedent. I think we're just giving her the opportunity to work a little bit more closely with staff in a way that might work for everybody. I don't see this as going off the rails.
But didn't the city manager say they've been working together already?
I mean, I think the city...
It was just 2 conversations today. I've only seen this contract over the last few days since the agenda was written or published.
So I'm willing to go with consensus. If you feel like you want to vote, Deputy Mayor, we can vote.
I don't want to vote. I just want to say that it's a can of worms, and I did have something that was right in my wheelhouse, the printing of the park guides, and I voted for it and said, hey, let's talk offline and see if there's another way that we can approach this. There's some similarity there, I suppose, but I voted for it to adopt it. And maybe what really should be happening is that we should be voting for this, put the arborist on board, and have Councilmember Lyons working with the arborist and city staff as appropriate, meeting to talk about these things and decide when it's appropriate to bring a council member initiated item if necessary to address policy issues that this policy body would normally consider. So, but I'm not going to get in the way. I just am going to make note that that this could, lead to some other situations.
Okay. So that's noted. And so I think unless somebody objects, we have consensus to pull this item.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so and now we will move to item 8H. And we do have 2 public speakers on item 8H. Would you like to hear from the speakers first?
Yes, please.
Okay. Our first speaker is June Hansberger. June, you can start when ready.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, June.
Great. I just wanted to voice my support for this plan that is coming forward, and I appreciate that the council is looking at mobility and safety along Vulcan. And I just am looking forward to hearing the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rob Fleener.
Good evening, Mayor, and Deputy Mayor, and council members. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you. Please rethink some of the staff's recommendation for safety on Vulcan Avenue. The suggestion to place a pedestrian walkway on the east side of the street makes no safe sense unless you're going to stop parking on this side. Walking north, you will be facing away from fast traffic, going around parked cars, and crossing active driveways, all of which put you at risk. Since we've added the DG all along the west side of the road, what about moving the cement bumpers in and put parallel parking along that strip? This would leave enough DG area for a safe walkway most of the length of Vulcan. The cost to the city would be minimal and easily accomplished. We definitely need a safe pedestrian path here, but the decision without no parking on the east side of Vulcan is not a safe solution. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. That does conclude speakers on this item, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. First, does the Deputy Mayor have his hand up on this item?
If Abe is going to make a presentation, then I'm interested in hearing what he...
Okay, go ahead, Abe.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Yes, I do have a short presentation. Is it shared?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. So yes, the item that we have today, it's a long-standing item, Vulcan Avenue safety enhancements. A bit of background: when streetscape was being processed initially, both the City Council and the Coastal Commission conditioned the project and staff to, in advance of the project happening, implement certain improvements along Vulcan in anticipation of possibly cut-through traffic, some shift of traffic because of the streetscape onto Vulcan, and in general increased traffic on this road, and with the concerns of speed or extra volume of traffic or non-commuter traffic. A certain budget was set aside for a study and certain improvements. There are, as you know, multiple major projects and studies going on in this stretch north of Encinitas Boulevard to La Costa in this corridor. We have the double tracking project going on. There is a major watershed and potential storm drain project. This is under study, but there will be improvements with it. We have the Coastal Rail Trail, the CRT extension in this area, that the fate of it, the ultimate fate of it is not yet finalized. As you know, we recently implemented certain temporary parking improvements along NCT right-of-way with the agreement that we have and the extra parking spaces that were made available to members of the public. However, with the condition that we have, we started last year with designing a siding and a striping project that we thought, with the conditions of the road that we have, with the fact that we have a lot of moving elements right now that are not finalized, we thought what we can do to make things better in advance of the streetscape happening, while we know there is more that can be done after all these questions about double tracking, CRT, the drainage, all these questions are answered and all these different major improvements have happened. We certainly have a lot of options afterwards. But right now, with the corridor that we have in hand, with the pavement that we have, that we know we can't move that much, what we can do. So some sort of interim safety enhancement in advance of the streetscape. We did design something we presented to Traffic Commission last year. It was unanimously supported by the commission and was recommended to be brought to the City Council. The improvements that I mentioned, most of them are included here in this slide. We are going to narrow down the lanes. As you know, Vulcan, I would say around half, 2/3 of the segment, it is already narrow, but we're going even further narrow. We were in some areas, we're like 23, 24, 25 feet is the whole width of the road. We are moving down, as you know, in other streets of the city, we have done this. We're going to 2 10-footers, and we're saving the 3, 4, 5, 6 feet that we have for the multi-use pathway. So the number two, the shifting the travel lanes, it's nothing major. We are just pushing both of the lanes all the way to the westerly edge, opening up a space on the east side. This path, the width changes. In some areas it's 4, it's a very, very small stretch. I think it's around 3, but the majority of the road is 4, 5, 6, 7 feet wide. And the parking that we have on Vulcan on the east side, it does not impede this path that we're forming, because this path is being formed on the existing travel lane. So we're not utilizing the parking space to form this path. So the path that we're forming, although it's not perfect, again, in some areas it does become narrow, but it is still not in the area that cars park at the moment. So it will be continuous per se. We will include some shadow markings. The lanes are becoming narrow. The speeds are 30 and 35. I believe the south of Leucadia is 30, north of Leucadia 35. Both are reasonable, meet the standards for a shadow. Obviously, we don't have the width for a bike lane. We might have it in the future with the ultimate Vulcan when it's fully built in the future, but at the moment, we obviously don't have the width. So following our ATP guidelines, we are going with a shadow. We will be adding speed limit legends, hopefully after the lane narrowings, similar to other roads of the city. We'll do another speed survey. Chances are we will be able to lower the speed limit. There is another item that we will have for council in the near future. That future item might also give us the opportunity to lower the speed limit on Vulcan. So with the future, hopefully lower speed limit of the roadway, we will be painting speed limit legends on the road. And then 3 locations were spotted with the pedestrian activity that we observed and with the ADA improvements that we thought were implementable, and also considering a reasonable space between these speed tables that can help us with the traffic calming effect that we want to achieve. Andrew Avenue, Sanford, and Orpheus, these 3 locations together with the stop sign that we have on Paul Ecke, they kind of are spaced in a way that we anticipate these speed tables will not allow vehicles to speed up that much. Obviously, if we have a very high accelerating vehicle, they can still go fast in between these speed tables. However, we feel they're spaced reasonably. They can help us a lot with the traffic calming effect. And our fire department have been consulted, and this has been blessed. And this is it's just a sample. I just wanted to show council and public how this will look like. So as you can see, we have various widths. So this is right south of Sanford. So we are showing the raised crosswalk on the north leg at the Sanford intersection. We will have the ADA improvements on both corners, on both sides. And then the road that is 26 feet wide, right on the south leg, and then it kind of becomes wider when we go further south to 37. We are utilizing all the space on the east side to form this walkway. The lanes will become 10, and whatever space remains on the east side, as you can see, like right at the intersection, it's around 6 feet. So this is the space that people actually utilize right now. I mean, some people decide to walk on the west side, but walking on the west side would require people crossing Vulcan, which is not the easiest and most convenient. So a lot of people, especially with kids, they tend to walk on the east side. So we thought, as a low-hanging fruit, as something that we can do as an interim measure, keeping this on the east side would be easier to implement and more feasible, and will give us the best bang for the buck at the moment. So further south, as you can see, it's way wider. So we have the parking lane, and then there is a good ample, like 8-footer space that people can utilize the way they like. We're not gonna call it a pedestrian path. We're not gonna call it a bike path. Our active transportation plan has this edge of the road enhancement that is a multi-use path, can be used by anybody. So there will not be any ped legend or bike legend or anything on this edge area. This is basically an edge area that is paved and easy and convenient to use until we have a fully improved Vulcan that we can do a lot more on for sure. Thank you. That concludes my small presentation. I'm open to questions, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I appreciate hearing the presentation, because I will say that my instinct was that it doesn't belong on that east side. you know, especially because parts of it have a raised curb and you're protected. You have like already a barrier protected bike and ped lane, right? I mean, so this section you're showing right here, there's parking in the rail corridor, right?
Correct. I believe we recently added parking there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
yeah.
So all of this is taking place north of the El Portal construction project, right?
The project starts from Encinitas Boulevard all the way north. So even right exactly after the signal, we are narrowing down the lanes.
Okay.
So even before Paul Eki.
Yeah. I mean, so I'll just say that I am having a little heartburn about it saying yes to this east side. I mean, I go to the farmer's market and sometimes I'll cross over to the west side to walk a very short distance to the parking lot, or which is like not that far, but because it's such a drag to walk next to the cars and in the dirt and crossing with other people, I'd just rather be protected by that barrier. And so the idea that people who are walking their kids to school or walking this entire corridor for exercise are really going to be right next to speeding cars, I just have a hard time like really thinking that's true. And we received a lot of different emails with all these different ideas, and you know, but I do see you've put a lot of thought into this. I in general think you do a great job with designing things in our city, and the traffic commission approved it. So you know, I'm having a hard time with this. I also do not think we should be putting sharrows in when we could have a multi-use path where people could walk and bike in the same corridor. But I'm glad you're calling it a multi-use path and not a ped path, because the place in Cardiff on the same road on San Elijo Avenue where we put ped only, I think is a mistake. It's almost never used by peds, and it just creates extra lines on the ground. And, you know, so having it be a multi-use path is much better than having it say ped path, I think. So I'll let my other two colleagues weigh in here though. Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you. I think your instincts are right on. It shouldn't be on the east side, and there shouldn't be sharrows. And you and I have had conversations about the appropriateness of sharrows. I think they serve a purpose, but narrowing these lanes and putting in sharrows, especially for bicyclists southbound, is just a terrible mistake. I have used, you know, I ride on the 101, which has sharrows on the southbound side, and but there's enough room for me to stay to the right, and you know, drivers do continue to pass me, and I'm not supposed to do that, right? They say take the lane. Some people take the lane, and that's fine. I'm comfortable being on the side. I was riding southbound the other day, and a vehicle approached me at significant speed southbound and wouldn't get off my rear. And I finally decided to ditch into the newly leveled DG path that we have for parking and walking, and let that car pass me, because it was not a comfortable situation for me. So I do not support sharrows here. I don't support the striping that pushes traffic and vehicles to the west, because like many of the emails we received, I fully support moving the curb stops, the wheel stops to the east, and turning the parking from perpendicular parking to parallel parking. And could somebody put up the staff report, page 7? The Traffic and Public Safety Commission, I did speak to a commissioner who pointed out that they were given essentially a binary choice, and it was this or nothing, and they didn't kick it back to staff and say, you know, let's try over. So their vote, unanimous vote, was here's what we're proposing, and you know, they ended up supporting it. The other issue that I think is most important, and I will confess that I'm super frustrated about this area, is that when the Coastal Commission approved our streetscape with a requirement to address issues related to Vulcan and Neptune, the City Council allocated $100,000 for a study. And I don't believe that we've ever undertaken that study. And so this particular staff report doesn't have a drop of data that indicates what the traffic counts are, which intersections are, you know, which T streets are most used. Obviously, Andrew is pretty busy, but and so is Sanford. But that means that Sanford is essentially in the middle. And what about Jason or Glaucus? You know, we should have some more crosswalks. In fact, I would go so far as to say every street that tees with Vulcan should have a crosswalk, because we are doing work. We have now assumed liability for the railroad corridor, and we're making significant enhancements to the west side of Vulcan. And those enhancements are appropriate to be used as walking and biking areas. It could be the poor man's coastal rail trail, just like in Cardiff, where you've got space, you've got cars that buffer the walkers and the bicyclists. And getting people across with RRFBs is good. And I would even go so far as to say we should be putting in raised crosswalks as well. But I recognize that there are some public safety issues regarding emergency responders. So we would need to do an analysis of that, which is what we funded a couple years ago, 3 years ago, I think. And so I think this report lacks data, and that we should expend the funds that we had allocated for the studies to know exactly what we've got with Vulcan, and have a report that's prepared using empirical evidence and looks at Vulcan as the critical street that it is for people who live on the east side of the railroad corridor, and do everything that we can to make it safer for people to bike and walk.
Okay.
Is it possible to put up page 7 of the staff report? I could do that.
I'm not sure if IT does it, or I probably can do it myself too.
Yeah, one of us can.
Page 7?
Really, yeah, page 7, please.
I believe this is page 7.
No, it's the one with go down by Hillcrest. You're going the wrong direction, Jason. One more.
Page 8.
Right there. Okay, so you see Coral Cove Way and Ashbury Street. Coral Cove Way is a part of a development. It's probably the most recent major development in that stretch of in Northwest Leucadia. It's the former Ector greenhouses, and as a condition of their development, they had to make improvements to the west side of Vulcan. So there is curb that runs along the edge of the city's right of way to the west, and you see those 4 cars. You see those 4 cars are parked perpendicularly, and so you see that there is room. And then if you were to carry that out and do that same perpendicular parking and put in the wheel stops at the same location as that curb is there, you would end up with a really nice path to the west of those parked cars. And so I would, that's what I would recommend. So for me, I would like to approve the crosswalks at Andrew and Sanford and Orpheus, and direct staff to complete the study and come back with as many crosswalks as are possible.
Okay, Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree that we need to move forward with the crossings as proposed, the raised crosswalks to manage both speed and the ability for people to cross. And this east side striping, you know, I think we feel like we need to choose one side or the other of Vulcan to have pedestrian and bike activity, but I think we actually need to have space on both sides of Vulcan to accomplish that. And so the east side striping, I have a couple questions about. When Abe accomplished this on Neptune, which also doesn't have sidewalks north of, Athena Street, we had a striping on both sides. So to me, when I look at the stripe plan, it looks like there's just a single stripe on the east side that just says, here's the end of the travel lane, rather than having dual striping that designates this as a walking path. And I hear the mayor's concerns that you don't want to you don't want to put, too many stripes on the road. But I am concerned that what will happen is that we'll have cars that come parking right up to the edge line there, and then they're going to be parked in such a way that there's not a clear path for pedestrians. So Abe, can you comment on that? How will this east side walking path be striped? And being that there's no pedestrian legends, what kind of legends will we use to indicate that this is a multi-use path instead of just a really wide parking aisle?
Thank you, Councilmember Hensy, for your observation. That is correct. We don't have a outer edge line per se for this multi-use path. Reason being is, as you know, being a resident of the area, the width of Vulcan changes almost every 100 feet. So in Neptune, our width was almost constant. We had a fluctuation of around like 1 or 2 feet. I think the pet path that we have in Neptune, like, is mostly like 5 feet, 4 feet. Some areas it becomes 7. On Neptune, if we want to have an outer edge line, it would look very, very ugly, because along the stretch from Encinitas to La Costa, it would be almost a constant curvature. It would be 3, 4, 5, then 4, then 6, then 7. So there's no way, well, there is a way, it would just look very, very nasty. And to your concern about cars parked, as said, we have experienced this in South Vulcan, between Vulcan and Santa Fe, and then south of Santa Fe, where we added this edge line on the east side of the Northbound lane. Cars still continue park at the furthest east of the road. They do not, when you give them more space, people still, for opening their door, for the safety of them getting out of the car, or for their kids getting out of the car, they tend to, they might be a little bit more comfortable, maybe 6 inches, maybe 1 foot, away from where they used to park, but they'll still leave the space that we created for the pet path. I've visited this area multiple times when we were drafting this. I do not see that being a major concern, that a car parking in this path that we will be creating, impeding the path of pedestrians or bikers. I don't see that, to be honest. When we might have one outlier every now and then, parking like very bad, 4 feet, 5 feet away from the edge of the road and blocking this space, but I don't think it would happen. With regards to legend, when we did the Neptune, we brought a consent item to council as an experiment and introduced our marking for the pedestrian use. There's no such marking in MUTCD for a pet path, and there's also no standard pavement legend for multi-use path. So if that's the council's direction, we can certainly contact Caltrans and request some sort of experimentation to create a legend for a multi-use path for Encinitas.
Okay, so along some of the areas of Vulcan where it's only 2 feet, you're only going to have a 2 foot path. Are we removing any parking in those situations, or we're leaving all the parking as it is on the east side?
In those areas, I'm not sure if there is a 2. I might be mistaken. I thought the minimum was 3. There might be. If you've seen 2, I trust you. I thought the minimum was a very small stretch that we have 3, but there might be, again, I might be mistaken. Because I said it changes like hundreds of times. Like, there's no constant cross section on Vulcan for more than 200 feet. Those stretches that we have a very narrow width, there's no parking. If there was parking, I would have dropped it for the sake of pedestrian, this multi-use safety. But those are areas that we have dirt on one side and then another dirt or curb on the other side. I do not think there is a stretch that has parking that we're forming a 2-footer path adjacent to the parked car.
Okay, I might be reading it wrong, but it looks like at the intersection of East Jason South that there's a 2-foot path. And
by a parked car.
It looks like private property, so maybe we can't even remove that. But I'll move on with another question. So I agree with Tony that we need more speed tables and more pedestrian crossings, and I hope that we can analyze that, because I think even Union Street, where there's a stop sign, I don't know if we do a stop sign plus a raised crosswalk, but places like that, it's helpful for visibility, and also Sunset. And so looking at the striping plan for Encinitas Boulevard, I heard you say in the presentation that we will be modifying the striping beginning at Encinitas Boulevard, but I hope that we can do that and really narrow those lanes up, because there's quite a lot of asphalt and the sidewalk ends shortly after the park. And then any pedestrian who's walking around that blind curve towards Sunset Avenue is really in a precarious place. And so are we including the pedestrian edge line between the signal Encinitas Boulevard and up towards Sunset Avenue?
Correct. If I remember correctly, the design starts right north of, yes. So after this small, if it's a neighborhood park, so you see there is an edge line that starts opening here. So right at this curve, do I still have my screen shared?
Yeah, we can see it.
So you see the edge line starts right after the intersection area. So it opens up and moves the lanes toward west. And actually in this area, we had enough room to have both sides. So we have a 6-footer on this side and a 5-footer on this side. So right at Sunset, we are actually moving the lane. This actually helped us have better sight distance for cars turning off of Sunset toward north. It gives better visibility to everybody. So this moving lanes to the west is actually helping mobility too here.
Okay, that's good. And then as part of the El Portal construction, they've eliminated the little asphalt berm that we have for kids who are walking to school. Will the city be responsible for replacing that berm, or is that something that Granite does when they're done with the undercross?
I would have to report back on that. I don't know the answer about.
I just hope that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle, because it really is important. And I think I see kids crossing from the east side to the west side to be able to take advantage of that protection. And
the crosswalk that we recently added will have a trunk-weighted dome. We recently added a crosswalk in lieu of the one that we lost over there. Right south of Paulaki at Halcyon.
What about that?
The crosswalk was added. This crosswalk was added, and I said we will have ADA, because I think the ADA improvements are not yet 100% complete, but the crosswalk was added in lieu of the one that was removed at Paulaki.
That's helpful. So then two last things. One is that I've gotten some emails about the use of thermoplastic for sharrows, and that they're really discouraging that, members of the cycling community, because it's could be slippery. And so I hope that we can do, if we end up going forward with this tonight, that we would do those with paint rather than thermoplastic. And let's see. Yeah, I hope that you can help us just understand the red tape that will be involved with taking the parking from nose in to parallel, because I do want to accomplish that. I agree with Tony that we need to do that. We've invested a lot of money into the parking improvements north of Lucadia Boulevard, and they're really working. People are using that, they're walking around, but the nose in parking is still a hurdle. And so that figure that Tony brought up on page 7 just shows how nice and orderly it is when you take cars from nose in to parallel and how much space opens up. So can you please describe the process for us to be able to begin to embark on that endeavor to do so?
Sure. We talked about this in length with Lillian and Roy today. I see Lillian is online. I think it would be better if Lillian explains the process.
Thank you, Abe. So yes, I'm happy to address this. So I just want to sort of, we have heard a number of comments from the community that there's a desire for greater mobility and safety and access along the Vulcan corridor. And Abe's objective was to bring forward some suggestions that could be interim and implemented utilizing the method of tactical urbanism, which we've heard so often from this council. And so that's what you have here before you this evening. I understand that there was $100,000 set aside for a study. And I do just want to be clear that the intention of the staff was, Abe went out to the corridor on several occasions and has come up with a recommendation that he believes is an action instead of additional study. And that would achieve some of the objectives that have been vocalized by several of our residents that live in the North Lucadia area. With respect to making a change at this time with respect to the parking, that would be a much larger project than what Abe is presenting this evening. You know, it would require additional staffing, additional resources to better understand the process. We do understand that making a change to the parking at this time would have an effect on the amount of available parking that is available. And we would likely need to go through a design review and talk to the Coastal Commission, which could result in delays in our ability to implement that type of project in this area. Given our existing resource constraints with the number of engineers we have and their quite significant workloads, I would need to ask that such a project be prioritized as part of the annual CIP prioritization meeting, and so that we can properly think through what the process would be, start those discussions, come up with a better design, and make sure that whatever we design meets all of the objectives that would be laid out by the council.
Thank you, Lillian.
So I just wanted to follow up on two questions that are statements that Kelly or that Councilmember Hensy posed. So the thermoplastic, what is the, like, what is your multiple hour discussion about that resulted in?
Thank you, ma'am. I'm happy to answer that question as well. So we have been working closely with Public Works. We understand that there is flexibility should the council desire to utilize regular paint to maintain this corridor instead of thermoplastic. And we are willing to and happy to accommodate that request. We would just make known that that type of maintenance then would also need to be included as we develop operational budgets in the future.
Okay, well, to me, that seems fine. I mean, I'm not inside of your operational budget, but I think there's no question that going over these bumps of plastic on a bicycle is very disruptive. I mean, you even feel it in a car. So, you know, it's like, to me, it seems like we should be making our streets comfortable for cyclists. So I would support that, doing it in paint and not thermoplastic, recognizing that there will be additional maintenance costs. And then the other point that she made that I didn't feel was like fully actually followed up on was this question of the berms. So I know you said, Abe, that you didn't really know about the berms because you'll have to follow up on that, but then you started talking about a crosswalk. And so I just wanted to make sure to state that I think those berms, I mean, we have a protected bike lane and a protected walking path that is actually much more used, at least from my observation of that corridor, than the east side for people to be walking and biking. And so I just really hope and would like to reinforce that we should recreate those berms after the construction project at El Portal is finished, and keep a protected facility there. So do you know anything about, I mean, I know it's not continuous the entire way, obviously, to La Costa, but there are a large section, there's a very large section that is protected. So do you know anything about that and your idea of the corridor and that protected space?
No, Mayor, unfortunately not. That project is handled by our CIP team. My involvement is very, very limited. We did help with the traffic control, and this newly installed crosswalk on Halcyon was done by the traffic team. But that project is a CIP project. I'm not sure if Lillian knows. I personally would have to check with our CIP team and get back to council.
Okay, Lillian, do you want to say anything?
So I cannot, similar to Abe, I'm not sure about that particular detail, but we understand that it's important and necessary for the community. So we, regardless of whether it's in there now, we will make sure that it gets put back.
Okay. And I mean, I just want to emphasize, we talked earlier today about hiring someone in the city who's overseeing both planning and engineering. And like this idea that we're designing our road and it's right next to a rail corridor and there's no coordination between those two when there's a dedicated walking, biking, protected path in the rail corridor. Like, to me, that seems like one of those things we should really focus on for this new person, or however the hierarchy within staff works, so that those two things are much closer integrated. Because, I mean, for obvious reasons, this is one corridor. Like, someone who's going to walk on the street versus walk in the rail corridor doesn't know or care which agency is overseeing it. Of course, this is our CIP team, right? This is our city project. So, like, to me, these things really need to be, the staff should really know what's happening in both projects in order to be talking about this. So, I mean, I hope that you agree with that. I don't know if the city manager needs to weigh in here, but I mean, to me, that just seems really obvious.
Mayor, I'm happy to weigh in. So I believe that Abe may not have been involved at this point, but moving forward, Abe is involved in the Santa Fe project. He's been involved intimately with the streetscape reimagining. So whatever the culture may have been in the past is not going to be our culture in the future. We are one team. We are working collaboratively and working to share information in a way that best benefits our residents.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. So I guess, I mean, we do, of course, need to move on from this, and I see that the deputy mayor has his hand up, but my orientation is to trust the staff that this is something we can do versus not do, instead of trying to pick it apart and just do crosswalks. I think this corridor desperately needs improvement, and you know, it's not very much money. It's a really reasonable cost. So I would be inclined to approve this tonight, and we can always change it later and deal with the nose in parking and a lot of these other problems. But I do think we need to like try to make improvements, and this seems to have been well vetted. And I've been really happy with the other things that have been done in the city that try to accomplish these same goals. So Deputy Mayor.
Well, I won't be supporting it. I don't support Sharrows on this street. You know, it's disappointing that you rail against Sharrows, but they're okay here. It's a bad idea. So it's disappointing that this would include Sharrows. It's a terrible road to put bicyclists in the lane. Cars drive too fast. Do we have speed surveys, Abe?
Yes, Deputy Mayor. We did a survey.
How old are they?
Around 2 years ago when we, correct. But after this, we will be, as usual, when we narrow down lanes and implement different measures of traffic calming, we quickly do a survey. But as said, I because of the Brown Act, I can't talk about a future item. I just can say this, that we have other plans for this road that are way better.
And so do we know how many cars come off of Andrew and Sanford and Glaucus and Jason and Hillcrest?
I might have counts. I have not done counts for this specific design, but we might have counts in the office for other.
How did we pick those 3 locations for crosswalks?
There were mainly engineering judgment based on the spacing between them. Obviously, we didn't want to choose locations that were too close to each other. When you choose the speed tables that are too close, you don't get the best traffic calming effect. You want to spread them reasonably so that cars, as soon as they get to the 35, 40 miles per hour, then they see another one and they have to slow down again. That was one. And the second, as you said, is just our knowing of the city like yourself. We thought these are the more active intersecting roads. But to your question, exactly.
It would be good to have the.
Correct, yes.
I would like to have that $100,000 spent on a report. You know, we spent the money on Rancho Santa Fe Road for a nice report that analyzed all the counts, looked at all the intersections, had all the turn movements, counts, AM, PM, all of the detail to make informed decisions. And I have great admiration for your engineering skills, Abe, but this particular stretch of roads needs a whole bunch of data and analysis before we do things. I won't be supporting it because it has Sharrows, and I will be working really hard to get this issue back on the agenda so that we can get those wheel stops pulled out. I want to see what we promised the Coastal Commission about that, because I had no intention of assuming liability for the railroad corridor to turn it into a parking lot. I see a beautiful coastal rail trail on the south end of town in Cardiff, and it was my hope that we could do a beautiful rail trail on the north end as well. And what we ended up with is a parking lot. And you know, we deserve more, and I'm going to do everything that I can to advance the appropriate safety facilities for people to bike and walk in this Vulcan stretch. Furthermore, the little curb that runs from Leucadia Boulevard to essentially Sunset Drive, we should be analyzing whether that curb should be moved to the west so that people can parallel park there, and we can once again build another facility for bikers and pedestrians to walk and bike and be protected by a buffer of parked cars. Because what we have right now are people parking in a perpendicular way, driving over the curb and parking in the corridor. And so we need to do more to stop that and to make use of the asset that we have assumed liability for. So I'm very frustrated, and I'm sorry I can't support this.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you, Mayor. Abe or Lillian, could I ask some kind of more technical questions based on what Deputy Mayor Kranz has brought up? I was interpreting what you said so here we've got a schematic approach that you're putting before us. It's an approach that's based on an interim solution, but you're already planning on doing a little bit more data gathering before you entirely vet this. That's what I thought I heard you say, but maybe I misunderstood, and we actually need to go and grab $100,000 to do that level of assessment that Deputy Mayor Kranz is talking about. Which is it, or how would you clarify that?
Sure. To clarify, the $100,000 that was set aside for these interim improvements in advance of streetscape, we utilized that to design this in-house, make the measurements, do the site visits, do the evaluations. Everything was done in-house. So the council reports that's in front of you right now is recommending utilizing that money because the staff did not use that money for the design and the study to implement this. The $85,000 cost estimate associated with this is recommended in the staff report to be tapping into that same account. Now, if the direction is to use that money for a full-on study, we either have to just shelf this for now or have a different source of money, a different process of prioritization for this project.
So let me just tease down a little bit. This is interim. This is a schematic graphic level. Would you do any further engineering before you go to construction? Is there another level of detailing that you would do, or
no?
Or
this is what we have been. Projects like this for making these projects more, I guess, less cost prohibitive,
streamlined. Yeah.
We make these simpler, and our contractors know how we do things, and they just implement this. We go out there and walk them through the project, mark it up with a spray. So those days we look like contractors. We have paint over our pants and shoes, and we go out there in the field and implement this.
Yeah, it is truly more like the tactical urbanism. I get that, but anytime we do something like that perhaps isn't what I would consider fully engineered, we do risk that, encountering something that we didn't anticipate. That's all.
That is very correct. That is very correct. And our approach is we are out there in the field with the contractor, and we make modifications, and we make sure we have approval before the change for the design immunity purposes. We attach all these changes and the engineering charges approval to the design. So all those emails and all those notes that is about those minor changes will be attached to the work order for the purpose of design immunity.
Yeah, it gets a little dicey. I'm just going to say two more things, but it gets a little dicey because you've got a contractor on board who's proposed on a certain thing, and then you find stuff that maybe you didn't anticipate, and so it might adjust. Yeah,
that's very correct. The downside to it, engineering designed this because of the fact, as I said, how Vulcan changes its cross section. Just to have a survey on Vulcan itself, to have a CAT file for Vulcan, would cost us $20,000 to $30,000, let alone an engineering design. So a project that we designed in-house and can build for $80,000 would cost the same amount just to engineeringly design it.
I see. One more question, if I could get clarification. I'm hearing Deputy Mayor Kranz say he's not in support of sharrows and he doesn't want to use sharrows, but I've not heard that we've had a policy or even consensus around not using sharrows. And if that's really the direction we're heading as a city, I'd like some clarification, and perhaps since the city is showing sharrows here, perhaps there needs to be some clarification around that.
So MUTCD does have manual and uniform traffic control devices, which is our manual implementing these measures. Does not recommend utilizing sharrows for roads higher than 40 miles per hour. It's still not a shall not. MUTCD has this defined like shall, should, or may. And when it's a shall not, you usually get in trouble in court if you implement something that MUTCD says shall not. This one is not a shall not, and this one is not a 40 mile per hour road or above. So we have a 35 and a 30. So based on MUTCD guidelines, we're totally in the area that we are allowed to use. However, we do know the preference of council. It's not the preference of the staff either. But as you know, we have a very limited right of way to utilize on Vulcan. There's no way we can at the moment with the current pavement that we have to accommodate bike lanes, even in one side. So the fact that we can't do that, our options are either don't do sharrows and let bicyclists decide how they want to ride, or do sharrows and at least warn the drivers that they should expect bicyclists on this road. So again, this is not the perfect scenario, I understand, but between having these markings every 200, every 150 feet, 200 feet on the road, and all these signs that says bicyclists may use full lane, or doing nothing and just leaving the lanes for the bicyclists and vehicles to decide how they want to treat the road, we thought it might be a good approach. And again, I want to reemphasize, like, again, I can't talk much about it, but we do anticipate a very good scenario of lowering the speed limit on Vulcan. More on that to come. If that happens, and if we can lower the speed limit on Vulcan, then we're looking at a 25-mile-per-hour road that can easily accommodate a share very safely.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and also you can always ride your bike. I mean, this is what I would do, is ride in the multi-use path. Like, I mean, just like I ride the wrong way on Neptune, like, because, you know, it's like these decisions that you make about, so yeah, the sharrow's there, but you still make the decision to ride in the multi-use path. So it's not going to be like dirt. I mean, but anyway, okay, let's go through everybody and then let's just make a decision here. So Councilmember Mosca.
So I just want to start off and say thank you to Abe and Lillian and the entire staff for kind of bringing these ideas to us, because I do think that what we've been seeing is just, you know, a tightening of the budgets and just no money to be able to do things and you know, and launching additional studies. I mean, it's just we're kind of hesitant to do that because, you know, it's going to cost money, and then the actual project doesn't actually get done because it's so costly. And so here we have a situation where the staff is thinking very creatively and trying to, you know, see if they can kind of do something in-house to solve some of the issues that have been brought forward. And I think that it does kind of take a step in the right direction. But I think that I'm uncomfortable supporting something that the two people that live in the area, the two representatives that represent the area, you know, if they're not supportive, and I see that Kelly has her hand up again, if they're not supportive, I have a hard time supporting something that, I mean, these are the folks that walk the area, that know the area intimately, and every, you know, how things flow. And so, and this was on consent calendar. So my expectation is that people, you know, you all are working together and discussing these things as it's kind of emerging. And so I guess bottom line for me is I love this approach. I love the fact that you know, could have just been like, well, we don't have the money to do a study, or we're going to do a study and then that's not going to go anywhere because we don't have the money to implement the project. Instead of doing that, we basically said, let's do something in-house that meets some of the goals of the council and makes this road safer. So I like that, but I find it hard to support something that the representatives don't embrace. That's kind of where I'm at.
Let's see where Councilmember Hensy is.
Yeah, I actually am supportive of this plan before us tonight. I do share many of Tony's frustrations with the parallel versus the nose-in parking and just all the red tape that we encounter when we try to do that. But I understand that that's not Abe and Lillian's fault. That's just part of the process of being a coastal city and making these changes that affect coastal access. And I don't really want to hesitate on getting these speed humps in. I think that this is going to be an improvement. I think narrowing. I think that, you know, seeing that multi-use path striped in some really critical areas where right now it's, you know, especially that Encinitas Boulevard to Sunset transition is really difficult. And so I like seeing it there. But so yes, I do support it, and I will even make the motion that we approve this tonight. But you know, I don't want to lose sight of these long-term goals that Tony articulated very well, that we don't want this to just be a massive parking lot. And we didn't take on that liability for north of Lucadia Boulevard to be a parking lot. We took it on because we wanted to bring some things into our own sphere of control. And I think with the license we have with NCTD, we've done that. And now, hearing just how long it's going to be of a process to get us to the next process, I don't want to lose sight of that. But I also think these improvements need to take place as soon as they can.
Okay, I'll second your motion. Councilmember Krantz.
Yeah, I would point out there's really not that much that's creative about this. Essentially what you're doing is you're pushing the cars as far west as you can and leaving bicyclists that are southbound with no alternative but to block traffic. And there's no median, it's just a striped lane. So there's cars heading northbound while bicyclists are southbound with cars on their tail southbound who are frustrated and want to run you over. And so Sharrows, I think, are inviting problems in this particular stretch where there is no alternative other than to ditch onto the dirt. And I would love to be able to just start on the dirt, but cars are parked, in ways that make it impossible to be on the dirt with a bike or walking. So it's unfortunate that we can't bifurcate these improvements and do the study. The study is necessary. The study was done on Rancho Santa Fe Road. I know Abe is an expert, but having the numbers is really important. And frankly, the money was budgeted for it. So this idea that we don't need to spend that money and we'll just save that money by doing it in-house, it would be fine if you had all the studies that Stack did for the project on Rancho Santa Fe Road. But the reality is we don't know the movements from any of the side streets. We don't know the number of vehicles. We don't know anything about whether there should be a crosswalk at Glaucus as well. And I am going to find out when we're going to spend that money that we budgeted 2.5 years ago and get the empirical evidence that supports decisions that we make on this street. So I'll still be voting no because I don't want the Sharrows.
Okay.
Mayor, may I? I just want to mention one quick thing that might be good for the council to know, and the residents also has some educational component. So as you can see, in certain areas of the Vulcan, we have twin, like this stretch. I don't know, do I have still my screen shared?
You do, yeah.
So this area, as you can see, is 25 or 25. This area is 26. This area is 25. So as you know, the center line is right now right in the middle, and we have like 12 and a half or 13 feet in each side. And that's in no way enough for a bike lane because the minimum bike lane that California allows is 5 feet if you have a curb, 4 feet if you don't. So even with the 4, we're looking at a 28 feet minimum width to be able to accommodate 2 bike lanes. So we know that the current pavement width does not allow us. Now, what happens when we have 2 13-footers? The difference would be California law does not allow a vehicle passing a biker if they're less than 4 feet away from them. So what happens is we are kind of putting the bicyclists in a situation where the car tries to taunt them to move to the edge of the road, while in reality, it's illegal for the car to pass them. So that's something that we have to consider whenever we don't see a Sharrow, even when in any lane, there's no bike lane. When we see a biker, we should not pass them, even though the lane is wide. Even if the bike goes to the edge, we should not pass them. I have done this multiple times. When you see a biker that as a courtesy, they ride on the edge of the road and they try, even with gestures, they try to allow you to pass, but we should not pass. If for any reason, if your mirror hits them, if they lose control, the car is 100% liable. So because of that, we feel having 2 13-footers, although might look like it comfortably allows a biker to go to the edge and a vehicle to pass them, it makes the car faster. And then again, it's illegal to allow those cars to pass those bikers. Again, I'm in no way for Sharrows in comparison to bike lanes. It's just we cannot accommodate bike lanes unless we modify Vulcan, which we're talking about a very, very major undertaking. I just want to clarify that. Sharrows are not preferred bikeways for staff. It's just, there's no other way at the moment. I'm sorry that I interrupted.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and vote on the motion.
I just had one other point. I had my hand up again.
Oh, okay.
And I just want to confirm one thing. So the $100,000 was set aside for a study. So, and I think that what you're saying, staff is saying, is that we looked at the corridor, we can do the study, right? And then if we do the study, we wouldn't have the money to do the actual project because we would have spent the money, the bulk of the money, on doing the study, right? Here they said, okay, we have an issue here. We want to have some action here. We want to do something in the corridor, so we can spend the money on a study, or Abe can take a stab at basically putting some stuff together that answers and responds to some of the issues that council's talking about on this corridor, and take the $100,000, which we have not spent yet, and spend it on actually putting these new measures into place. Because if we didn't, then you'd spend money on a study that's not going to basically go anywhere. I mean, I think that's what is being said here.
I can't comment on the study not going anywhere, council member. To Deputy Mayor's point, there are a lot of information that can come out of that potential study that we do not have at the moment. So if we have a scope and we can talk about cut through traffic, we can talk about potential volume of the traffic changing in patterns. So there are a lot of things that can come out of that potential study. At the moment, what I can talk about is we have only 100,000 set aside for this. As you mentioned, we can choose to utilize this to implement something, a low-hanging fruit, an interim improvement, or utilize it for that bigger study. I can come back, if that's the direction of council, with a scope and a fee for a more glorified study that answers all the questions that we like to be answered, and then think about how do we want to use those results later on. I can't at the moment say it has budget or it doesn't, or it can be funded or not. That's a different, it has to be added to our CIP prioritization process. The results of that study, how it can become a project on the street, that's far ahead. We can't, I can't.
Okay, I'm gonna call the question, because we have other consent items. We've talked about this a long time. So there's a motion on a second.
There's important issues that need to be resolved before we vote. And so instead of calling the question, maybe there needs to be a vote on whether to call the question. I just went through this at NCTD. So if you can't give us just 30 seconds to make some comments, it would really be a bummer.
Okay, can we try to, so we can all make our points again. This is another study versus doing something. If you don't want to do something, vote no on it. If you want to do something for $85,000 that we can redo later, get into huge studies, go through multiple processes, put it in the CIP process, then vote no. But it's like, we've all made our points.
It's not as simple as that. The question is, when we budget for a study, does that mean we're giving staff the ability to decide to do it on their own instead of conducting a professional study? Is that what we're doing? I don't think we give them that choice. We committed to a study because the Coastal Commission and the community wanted some empirical evidence about traffic and the impacts that the streetscape was going to have on those cut through streets. So okay.
I would like to ask the city attorney about calling the question. As the chair, do I have the authority to call the question? This is not about berating staff. I'm going to stand up for staff and say, if we have a problem with the way the city manages.
I'm not berating staff. I want to know the answer to how we budget.
Okay, city attorney.
All right, any member has the ability to call a question. That is a procedural rule under Robert's rules. And what that does, similar to a substitute motion, is it just prioritizes that issue. When somebody does that, it puts that up. The rest of the council can, in fact, decide to override that and not call the question and keep discussion going. I'm not aware of any rules that the mayor in the Encinitas policies, and of course maybe the clerk knows that something I don't, that would give the exceptional rule to the mayor, unlike any other council member. So you could put yourselves in a position where another member says, I don't want to call the question, and then you take a motion on whether or not you call the question or keep talking at that point.
Yeah, and I made my point. Thank you for letting me make my point. You can have your vote.
Okay, I think so we have multiple items on consent. We have 2 agenda items. We've of course been meeting, since 4, and I think we need to move on from this.
Yeah, so go ahead.
Okay, so
I made my point.
So are you voting?
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Hensy? Is that a Councilmember Hensy? She said yes. Councilmember Lyons?
Yes.
Councilmember Mosca?
Vote is yes.
Yes. Okay. Deputy Mayor Crayons
No.
and Mayor Blakespear.
Yes.
Motion carries with Deputy Mayor Crayons voting no. That takes us to item 8J, and we do have a public speaker on that item.
Okay, let's go to
Would you
that.
like to hear from her first?
Yes.
Okay, Cindy Cremona is the speaker. Cindy, you can start when ready, and you do have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Kathy. Mayor and Council, I understand the Council is once again extending the temporary emergency motel voucher program, this time through September of this year. I believe the city has already spent over $1 million on this temporary program, which helps a handful of at-risk homeless participants. I'm curious about a few things. As of June 15th, the state mandates will be relenting. So why do we even require to continue this program, especially since over $1 million have been spent to house a few high-risk people? Who's paying for this? The state, federal funding, or the residents of Encinitas? Most importantly, why hasn't CRC found these individuals permanent residences? One would think for $1 million, these folks could be housed permanently and also provided the services they need. It doesn't seem very compassionate to spend over $1 million for people who obviously want shelter to live in a hotel room, when for the amount of funding going to CRC, they could be housed appropriately and permanently. By the way, where are the numbers to justify this expenditure from the city and CRC? I hope members of council discuss these details so residents can understand your logic around spending this amount of money on temporary housing, especially at a time where the city is borrowing money for projects we can't afford, like streetscape. Thank you.
And then we do have one more speaker on that, Natalie. Natalie, you can start when ready.
Hi, yes, I would just like to add that because of my issue over the weekend, I do request that this is not approved. There needs to be some kind of permanent housing for these folks, and there needs to be some alternative measures taken as far as mental health resources for these folks. So I would request that this be denied.
Is that the end of public comment, City Clerk?
That is the end.
Yes, that's the end of public comments.
Okay. Okay, so this is a very specific agenda item. It's not, we don't have on the agenda providing permanent housing for residents, but I do encourage everybody to support that when that comes onto the agenda. And I did want to say to Natalie that I am very sorry about the experience that you had, and we can tell that that was very upsetting, and I understand why that is very upsetting, and nobody likes to hear about that happening in the city. So it is, of course, something that is troubling. So I'm going to go ahead and move approval of this item.
Mosca.
Okay, we can start voting. Councilmember Hensy? Yes. Councilmember Lyons?
Yes.
Councilmember Mosca?
Mm-hmm.
He said yes. Deputy Mayor Crayons?
Yes.
And Mayor Blakespear?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously. That takes us to item 8K, and this was removed by Mayor Blakespear.
Okay, thank you. So I pulled this item because this has to do with our ADU policy. It's actually quite a long consent item with a lot of explanation of the different policies and ADU things we've done. But this is the part that I'm concerned about, and I just want to raise, is that it says that there are 40 existing dwelling units that have been permitted through this AUP program. So we have 40 of them in the city. And with those that have an expiration date, the unit must be brought up to zoning and building codes or demolished by the date of expiration. And so this is that program that required homeowners to deed restrict their accessory unit, but then they didn't have to bring it all the way up to code. And so periodically we'll get emails from people who are unhappy about the fact that they have deed restriction on their ADU, whereas others who did it more recently don't. And I'm just concerned about extending for 5 years a program that has to do with, potentially 40 of our residents not being able to have a reasonable option. So saying you have to tear it down or spend, some of them can't be brought up to code. The lot doesn't allow it and that kind of thing. So can someone on staff address that? Or if this is going to come up later in a short period, we can talk about it in a different item. I don't want to have a long discussion, but I was just concerned about this 5-year extension.
So the 5-year extension, the intent of it is to keep the program open and available to additional illegal units or those that are in our HCP program as that program ends in the next 5 years. That this program would still be available to them. Our goal is going to be to bring all units up to code, as many of these units as we can. But it's kind of meeting two needs of having a program for them that do have unpermitted units and then also provides affordable housing in our community.
So is there this staff report goes through the details of, we thought about having an illegal or an unpermitted accessory unit program, and then we did this and then we did that kind of thing. So, is there any thought about not having them have to demolish it? Like that are we having residents facing that hardship where it's expiring and they're faced with their only option is to demolish?
So we are going to be looking at other options. And so one of the options that was presented in the staff report was in regards to looking at an ordinance. And also we need to look closer at the new ADU laws as they've been coming in and allowing for less setbacks and things like that. So a lot of these units, we're going to be doing more education and trying to reach out to them to determine where they are currently within our current ADU laws. And so they may be able to be legalized just based on the ADUs laws as they stand right now.
Okay. I just really want to emphasize that we're trying to create ADUs, we're trying to create affordable housing, and we don't want to penalize our resident homeowners who are providing affordable housing. So I just want to make sure that we're not creating like a vice here where they don't have anywhere to move. And so, I know we're following up on laws as they change. We obviously are heavily involved in that. And we floated a bill on this to make it easier that was passed and signed that, you talk about in staff report. So I don't think this is about like the sort of delay associated with unquote understanding state laws, but I really want to just express, and I hope that our staff has internalized that we don't want our residents to be in that situation where their backs against the wall with their unit and they have to sell it or take it down. That there are many paths, but we're not forcing them into that, and extending this for 5 years isn't creating that. Because to me, it seemed like allowing this program to expire would mean that they wouldn't have to deed restrict their unit anymore. They could go to but
the covenants that exist with the AUP program, majority of them are in perpetuity, and then some of them have been taken down to 20 years. So those covenants would still exist. The timeline for the program itself and being available to the community is what's expiring.
Okay. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, this has been a vexing problem for many, many years, many councils. So I appreciate you bringing it up. I think that to your point, I would hope that we have the ability to put in place mechanisms that any decisions to direct a resident to demolish AUP is something that would come to the council, and I don't know what it would take to do that, but it is pretty important. All this housing is indeed oftentimes the affordable housing that we have, and But at the same time, a lot of it was built in ways that are, is a little sketchy. So each situation is somewhat unique, but ultimately I agree with you wholeheartedly that we don't want to put staff in a position of ordering for the demolition of any of these units without bringing it to council.
Thank you for clarifying that and stressing the importance of that. Does staff want to say anything else on this?
If there's any more questions, we'd be happy to answer any more.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and move approval.
I'll second.
Start voting. Councilmember Hensy?
Yes.
Councilmember Lyons?
Yes.
Councilmember Mosca?
I vote yes on this.
Deputy Mayor Krantz?
Yes.
And Mayor Blakespear?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously. We have now completed the consent calendar, and that takes us to action items.
Okay, we're going to move to action item 10B first.
Okay.
And we'll jump into that. And it's possible that I will just make this decision that we're going to move item 10A, the community grant program, to the next meeting, which is on the 16th. So anybody who is watching for that item could tune back in at the next item. And that's given because of the late hour and the potential depth of this item. So I'll hand it back now to staff to take this item 10B, which is the redistricting item.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Jay Schwarm, Risk Management for the City of Encinitas. We're here to discuss the redistricting process. And I had a preliminary presentation. However, in the interest of time, we have here as our team, Christopher Scannell from Nielsen Merkersmer, who is the attorney that assisted us previously and is well knowledged on districting and redistricting, and he's here to present the laws and why redistricting in the process. Also, as part of the team, National Geographic's demographic team of Doug Johnson and Shannon Kelly. They're here as well to answer any questions. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Christopher. He has a presentation for you, and he will get into the nitty-gritty and very specific details of redistricting. Christopher?
Yep. Thank you, Jace. And thank you for having me this evening. It's good to see some of you from a few years ago when we last went through this process, and also some new faces. Again, in the interest of time, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but if people have questions and want me to slow down at any point, please feel free to interrupt me. If you recall, there we go. We went through the process of adopting districts for the city of Encinitas in late 2017, 2018. Not all that long ago. And so I thought I would start off with the obvious question that I'm getting asked a lot by cities who have done the same. Why are we doing this? It's only been a few years. These districts aren't that old. There's kind of a short answer and a long answer. The short, semi-glib answer is because the legislature said so. But the longer reason is that they've adopted a system of requiring districts to be reevaluated every year after the census in compliance with U.S. Supreme Court case law that goes back to the 1960s. Basically, the court said that to be constitutional, districts have to be at least every 10 years reviewed for population equality. And most states, California included, have tied that to the release of the census. And it just makes some sense, because if you recall, when we did this last time, even though we were doing it in 2017, 2018, we were using 2010 data. So the districts are population balanced as far as we know, based on data that are 10 years old. And so now we're looking at them using the new data that should be coming out to make sure that they remain population balanced. And I said, coming out, some of the key parts of this process in terms of timing, the number one key part of it is the release of the data. Obviously we can't draw any maps until we have the Census Bureau data. Normally those would have been released at the beginning of April. Sometimes they're early. But this year, because of the pandemic and all of the confusion and disruption that went with that, the Census Bureau announced that it's not going to be able to put out its normal data until basically it's August, mid-August. And it's going to be produced in a format that is a little bit rougher and less user-friendly than they would normally produce it. And so they, California statewide database, which is the database that incorporates both the census data and some additional data for the state redistricting, is going to be taking that new census data that's not so user-friendly and processing it in a way that will make it possible to use for people. And in addition, they'll be taking some additional steps that are required now by recent changes to the elections code and modifying the census data slightly. And what they're doing is they're requiring basically any persons incarcerated in prisons to be reallocated back to their last place of known residence, if that can be done. And so between the process of first adjusting the Census Bureau data to make it usable, and then also making the additional adjustments for the prisoners, they're estimating that it'll probably be about 6 weeks from the time the Census Bureau releases its data. And so we're looking at probably sometime late September, early October. And we have the National Demographics team here on the phone. If there are questions about that, they can probably give some more detail about the latest on that. But that's kind of what we're looking at. And so in terms of timing, that's when the rubber is going to start to hit the road. The data come out at around October 1st, give or take, and then we have to wait a few weeks until maps can start being drawn. And so that's, in a sense, that's the beginning of the process. There will be some steps before that, and we'll talk about that. But the other key date in all of this is the deadline to complete. Under changes to state elections code, again, because the legislature substantially rewrote the rules, the new deadline for adopting adjusted trustee area boundaries, or I'm sorry, district boundaries, is April 17th of 2022. So we have, a fair amount of time. There'll be a little bit of a rush toward the end. And obviously there are a lot of other people doing this at the same time. But that April deadline is kind of a drop dead. At that point, if we don't have the districts done, it goes to court, and the court then has the opportunity to readjust the districts if need be. As a practical matter, in preparing this process and in proposing a timeline that we'll walk through, we've tried to leave some extra time. We're not pushing it up to the April 17th deadline, partly because the registrar needs some additional time, if they can have it, to implement the lines. They're going to be receiving adjusted lines from all the cities and school districts and everybody else in the county. And they're going to need time to reassign the voters, make sure the lines are correct, and the whole works. So we're trying not to jam them, and so we're trying to leave a little bit of extra time at the end. So when the legislature enacted the Fair Maps Act in 2019, as I said, they rewrote the rules. There were two major pieces of it. They changed the process pretty substantially from what it used to be. Historically, it was 2 hearings and you were done, and that was the end of it. And then the other piece of it, they've also changed the substance and what gets taken into account. And so starting with the public, the process requirements, they first required that that all cities now, instead of 2 public hearings, must conduct at least 4 public hearings. And at least one of them has to be before the maps are drawn and become public. And at least 2 have to be after that happens. So then the 4th one is a little bit of a floater. It can either be before or after. And then the other piece of it is they require that at least one of those hearings be on Saturday, Sunday, or after 6 p.m. on a weekday, which obviously for a city council meeting in the evenings, you're going to comply with that as a council meeting. They also added some additional notice requirements in terms of the time and the posting and everything else that are a little bit more than the Brown Act would require. And related to that, they've also provided that going forward, each of the hearings that are conducted have to be conducted at a time certain. In other words, you put it on the agenda and you say, we're going to have this public hearing at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, whatever. And you reach that time and it's the council then has to do that hearing, even if it means moving up that item on the agenda to have it. You know, you can finish whatever item you're in the middle of, but then the next thing has to be the redistricting public hearing. The idea is, you know, people may be waiting for a while to provide their input. And so the legislature determined that they wanted them to have some predictability. I should maybe comment, this may not sound that shocking to you because this was pretty similar to the process we actually followed last time. You know, the Encinitas held more public hearings than were required at the time. And this is actually very similar to the process we went through, except that now we have a little bit more time than we did last time. It was only 90 days then. In addition to the public hearing requirements and the notice requirements, the legislature has also added some requirements requiring the city to encourage public participation by making a good faith effort at media outreach to local civic groups, and especially those in underrepresented and non-English speaking communities. There are some requirements for live translation in applicable languages, which in Encinitas means Spanish, if it's requested at least 72 hours before the hearing. And then all of the notices and draft maps have to be put on the internet. We'll talk about that just a little bit more, along with all of the maps and all of the relevant demographic data. And again, this isn't really different than the process we went through last time. You know, all of the maps that we considered last time as part of the process, those were all online and they were all made readily available. But now it's just a statutory requirement. Third, the legislature has required that cities now have to give their citizens an option for submitting maps, both electronically and in writing. The National Demographics team has several available electronic tools, online tools that are going to be incorporated. Again, you know, we had that last time too. You know, you may be sensing a theme that you know, what the process that we went through last time was, at the time, was kind of best practices. Now it's become the requirement, but it'll be a very similar process as we go through it. Finally, we're required to put all of the public comments and you know, proceedings of the council, et cetera, online within 2 weeks of them being conducted. And the board has to, this is maybe the one big one, has to maintain a website with all of these materials for up to 10 years. And so basically, you know, there will be in perpetuity, the city will have a redistricting devoted website. There's already a link to it on the city's website now. And it has an explanation of the process and all of the maps and all of the agendas and a calendar and schedule. And all of those things. And then, you know, it'll be held for 10 years and then you'll have to do another one for the next process. And the Secretary of State has provided a template for that sort of website and what needs to be included on that. So taking all of these requirements into account and taking the council's meeting schedule into account and everything else, what we've done is we've proposed a timeline that could be followed to meet all of the requirements, make sure that all of the boxes are checked, all of the hearings are conducted, et cetera, in coordinating them with the release of the census data and everything else. And so what we are anticipating, sort of as a rough outline, is getting the website and all of those materials up by July 1st. And then what we're proposing is a sort of a town hall, consultants and staff to have the public come in and understand what's going on. And you recall last time they were introduced to the mapping tools and the consultants, walk them through all of the steps, and so that they can more effectively participate in the process. And then, as we said, August, we are anticipating the Census Bureau's initial release. And so what we're proposing, because the first hearing has to be conducted before maps are drawn, is that there be an initial hearing at the September 22nd meeting. That would, and the purpose of it, since there aren't maps on the table, would be to get feedback from the public about the communities of interest that should be taken into account, and about the current districts. And then we'd have the final release of the state data in early October, ideally. And so then it would start to kind of hit the road from there, which would be another hearing in November, with information about the current districts based on the final data, and get some more feedback from the public then with that additional information. And that would be the meeting at which you would then instruct the demographer, the demographic team, to go out and draw maps and which particular communities of interest to take into account in that process. And then we would have several opportunities for the public to submit maps, and we have deadlines tied to the subsequent hearings. So we would be proposing a January 19th hearing, and that would be where we'd first have the presentation of the maps to the public and to the council by the demographer. And then looking for a final public hearing in early March. And as I said, that gives us a little bit of wiggle room in case we need to push things back a little bit, because the deadline isn't until April 17th. But we've built in that cushion both for the city and for the registrar's office. And then, so that's a lot of process. I mentioned also that the legislature rewrote the rules about the criteria and the considerations that go into drawing these lines. And I'm not going to go into them in a lot of detail, because we'll be talking about them quite a bit as we go forward. But last time we did this, the rule was basically the federal laws that you see listed on the left hand were basically the same, right? You have to comply with equal population, that 10% deviation. You have to comply with the Voting Rights Act, although given the small minority population numbers in Encinitas, that wasn't really an issue. And the sort of related limitation on racial gerrymandering. But it used to be that then the council had a lot of discretion beyond that in terms of what it took into account, how it treated it, how it weighed various factors, and largely, you might say, unlimited discretion. That's not true anymore. Now what the legislature has said is there are certain criteria that have to be taken into account, and they have to be taken into account in a specific order and in a specific way. And so the first one, the most important, is contiguity. That's pretty simple in most cases. But then the next big one is communities of interest, and neighborhoods have to be, their divisions have to be minimized to the extent possible. Before, that was a factor that the council could take into consideration, but it wasn't required to. And so you might remember that in this process a few years ago, we considered maps that would have done sort of east-west strips across the city, so that all of the council members had various parts of the city. Had that map been adopted, it's probable that map would require significant changes, because it didn't keep communities of interest unified, it split them. As it turned out, the map that ultimately was adopted was much more focused on the city's historical neighborhoods, which are, a good example of communities of interest. In fact, Encinitas probably has more defined communities in that sense than a lot of cities. And so it's possible as we go through this, depending on the testimony, that, it won't be a huge change in terms of the population and in terms of the communities of interest that are put forth. I don't hold me to it. We'll still have to see based on the actual census data, but that is a distinct possibility in this case. And then the third most important.
Go further. This is Jay. Sorry to interrupt. Would you go further to say there is a possibility that we may end up with the same maps with some small tweaking?
It's a distinct possibility. I mean, my experience and Doug can talk to this too, in cities, coastal cities that are, well developed and without a lot of growth, is that the population tends to be fairly stable. So there is a possibility that they'll still be balanced. There was already at the last process a pretty heavy emphasis on the existing communities, the 5 communities that were formed Encinitas. And so it is a possibility that after we get through this process, the map will not be significantly different than it is now. I mean, obviously you'll have some discretion in that too, and we'll have to hear what the public says, but that is a distinct possibility. And then the final consideration is compactness of the population. And again, the current districts are fairly compact, relatively speaking. There are some slight deviations from that for the equal population consideration, but relative to some other places, they're fairly compact. And then once all of those criteria are taken into account, then you can consider other traditional criteria so long as they don't interfere with your ability to comply with these statutory mandatory criteria. And so things like avoiding head-to-head contests between incumbents is a traditional one. Trying to minimize the number of voters who switch between districts and maybe vote twice in a row, or maybe skip an election, that sort of thing. Or, also future population growth. If there's an area that's likely to grow, maybe you underpopulate that district a little bit to sort of anticipate that going forward. But again, those are going to be considerations that really only come into play once you're sure that you've met these 4 mandatory criteria that the legislature has specified. So with that, I think what I want to do is pause briefly and see if there are questions about this. I've also had a request to talk a little bit about redistricting commissions. And so I have a separate PowerPoint about that, but I think maybe this is a good sort of time to pause and see if anybody has questions or comments about, the sort of the substance.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. Councilmember Mosca.
Chris, thank you for being with us again this time. As you said, it was only a few years ago. It seems like yesterday that we put these districts together. And thank you for also confirming that we put together pretty good districts based on some of the analysis that we've received in the past and based on some of the criteria that we were working with. One of the things that I thought that we did really well last time was the public outreach and really having a lot of different public meetings. One of the meetings that I really enjoyed was one of the ones that we had at, I think it was at Ada Harris, or maybe the other elementary school there on the coast. And it was really where we gave the public an opportunity to utilize the tools that we were using to map. And so and that wasn't required, but it was a best practice. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more about, moving beyond what we've done before, which is now kind of standard, and looking at being as innovative as possible. Obviously, we've had a pandemic since the last time we met. And there are a lot of folks that have adapted to virtual meetings and virtual online tools. And so just want to make sure that we're adjusting and adapting and want to make sure that we're as open and as transparent as possible and that we're as innovative as possible. How can we get the public engaged? How can we get them to be a part of this process? How can we, I don't know if this is a goal, but it should be, how can we get them to submit as many maps as possible so that, I think we had like maybe 20 submitted last time, maybe we have even more submitted this time. And how do we get that as one of our goals to really kind of drive just more community engagement and more understanding and more public participation. And it may not just be at like kind of meetings. I mean, of course we have to do what we have to do in terms of the law, but it may not just be like at, meetings at City Hall, and maybe, a bunch of different ways of really engaging people to help them as well draw maps that may actually be, viable maps. Because I think the last time we may have had 20, 25 or something like that, but some of them weren't really even viable maps. And so, not only driving up the numbers of people participating and submitting maps, but also submitting maps that are actually consistent with what the task is, which is, you know, putting together districts that can meet all of the demographical requirements and all of the other balancing that we have to do as a city council. So looking forward to just kind of any ideas that you have in terms of what you've seen in other communities where we can really engage people and get them as part of the process, because that's so important in this. Even if what you and Jace are saying in terms of like, okay, you use the census data from 2010 and it was like 59,000. And, you know, maybe you have 65,000. I don't even know if you guys have updated, if you have any clue in terms of what we have in terms of population before October, September, but maybe there's a 3, 4, 5,000 population increase. And so, you know, you may not have to move the lines all that much, but I think that that's fine, but we should approach this in a way that it's major change, because we want to drive more public participation as much as possible, because it's not only about the changes, but it's also about legitimacy of the districts and making sure people believe that they're the best that they can be. So thank you. Any information you have on that would be awesome.
Doug, maybe you would like to address some of the questions and comments by Councilmember Moscow. You're on mute.
There we go. I missed the button. So yeah, no, that's certainly our plan to go above and beyond and do as much outreach as possible. And the city staff have already passed that along, that is the goal of the city. So we'll certainly be offering both the tools we offered before, which are still cutting edge, and a couple of new tools that have come out to enhance that citizen experience. So that's certainly our plan. And I would, I see we have 4 hardy souls still watching the meeting. I would reassure them that, as Chris mentioned, having the hearings at a set time is definitely an advantage, so people know exactly when to tune in and share their thoughts. So that'll help through this whole process. But we certainly embrace the spirit that you're expressing.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. So this will be my first redistricting process, and Councilmember Massa sort of touched on what it was like last time, but I'm just curious to hear you expand on the fact that the public is still welcome to submit maps, and then it will be a demographer who's presenting all the different maps. And so those who submitted their maps as members of the public, do they present their maps and say what's so great about them, or is the demographer sort of just looking at what they've done and presenting that to the public?
Doug?
Yeah, it's a combination. So we process their maps and put them all in the same format. So when we put them in the packet and online for people to review, you and the residents don't know, did they use the high-end tool and spend a lot of time, or did they just sketch it on a napkin? You know, there's no bias for what tool they use to submit it. But yes, and so we would present the data and the messages that they submit with their map. But of course, we do encourage the residents to also show up at the meetings, at the council hearings, and to testify and support and answer any questions that the council may have about their map.
Right, and Doug, doesn't your process when you receive a map from the public also include your check and balances with that so that it complies with the law? Because in the past, a couple of maps that were submitted did not meet the criteria and the guidelines that the law provides, yes? Could you clarify that?
Yes, so, and I should note, I failed to mention earlier, I'm joined by Shannon Kelly. Her Zoom won't let her turn her camera on, but Shannon Kelly from my team is here, and we'll both be working together on this project. So between the two of us, we'll present the maps, and yes, if they don't meet the population balancing requirements that Mr. Scannell mentioned, they'll be, we'll still show it to you, it's part of the record, but it'll have a big red stamp on it saying not population balanced. Or if, the review of our demographics and legal review, I don't think this will happen in Encinitas, but if there was a problem with not complying with the Federal Voting Rights Act, it would have a big stamp notifying you of that. So certainly those things that are clear, rule it out items we will mention when we present that to you.
So there's an analytical process that the demographer goes through to make sure that it meets the right criteria.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, let's proceed with or Deputy Mayor, do you have a question? Oh, we can't hear you.
No question, but is there more presentation? I'm sorry.
There is. Yeah, this was
Okay.
like the halfway mark.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, so again, recognizing the time, I will be quick. But I was told that there were some questions about this. So I put together a brief presentation about redistricting commissions. So the default process for this is the one that you went through last time, which is the council holds the hearings, the council does the whole process. You can have sort of additional things on the side, like the presentation at the elementary school, et cetera. But it's a council-driven process. That's how it is built to work. But in a couple of years ago, the legislature enacted an option for cities and counties to use redistricting commissions as an alternative. And so historically, a city could always appoint an advisory commission, obviously. It always had the power to ask people to give it recommendations. But it could do that without regard to any sort of rules or process or anything. But the legislature has sort of formalized it now. And so now there are 3 different types of commissions that are authorized by state law. One is pretty similar to what you could do before. It's an advisory commission, which is a commission that basically makes recommendations to the council, whether it be sort of principles or criteria or actual maps. They're making recommendations, but ultimately, again, the final decision-making authority rests with the council. The alternative, the sort of opposite end of the spectrum, if you will, is the independent commission. And the way that works is basically, once you set it up, they have the process from beginning to end. They adopt the final map without any further input from the council. And then there's sort of an in-between version, the hybrid commission, where the commission proposes, at least 2, and could be more maps to the council, and then the council has to choose among those proposed maps. It can't go off and do its own. But it can choose among the sort of smorgasbord that's presented to it. It can make minor modifications if they're legally required, but otherwise it's limited to the options proposed. And so, very briefly, in terms of how these work, in terms of appointing, the council has a fair amount of discretion as to how to set up the appointment process for each of these. The advisory commission, you have complete control over the appointment process. Each one of you on the council could just each appoint your representative, or you could do application process or anything else. Hybrid commission and independent commission require an application process. The council can still kind of decide how to set that up. Except that it has to be open to all members or all residents of the city, and the council in that scenario, for either a hybrid or an independent commission, can't directly appoint them. It has to be, go through this application process and they be appointed that way. And there are various ways to do that also. It's in that scenario sort of similar to the state redistricting commission. There's also sort of with respect to the eligibility to serve on a commission, an advisory commission is pretty wide open. It's a little bit more restrictive than it was before in the sense that an elected official can't serve on it, city official, nor can any of the elected officials, family members or staff members. Otherwise, the council can appoint pretty much anybody in the city. But you could choose to adopt additional restrictions if you want. So you could say, we're going to have at least 1 person from each district, for example. Hybrid and independent commissions have much, much more extensive restrictions on who can serve on them. Not only is it a restriction on elected officials serving, but a person who wants to serve on one of these commissions, they can't have been elected or appointed or even run for city office in the previous 8 years. And they can't serve if their family member has done that either. They, can't have done a number of other things in the previous 8 years. They can't have been an officer or an employee or consultant for a candidate or, elected official. They can't have served as an officer of a political party or a party, county central committee. They can't have been a consultant to a current elected official or, lobbied the city. I'm not sure if you have a formal lobbyist registration ordinance. And they can't have made campaign contributions. So it's much more restricted. It's much more limited in terms of who can serve on those commissions, with the goal of sort of insulating it from politics a little bit more. In terms of what the process is, if you decide to proceed with one of these, an advisory commission is pretty similar to the process we walked through before, with the number of hearings and how it's all conducted and the timing. The only real difference, formally speaking, legally speaking, is that I mentioned before that you have to have at least 4 public hearings, and that at least one of them has to be before maps are drawn. The state law allows that one of those pre-map hearings to be conducted by the advisory commission instead of being done by the council. Otherwise, the remaining hearings would all be done by the council, as just as under the normal council process. The hybrid and independent commissions are different. They basically go off and they do their process, they do the hearings, and then with the hybrid commission, then they present it to the council for approval. But those are sort of separate processes, apart from the city council. In terms of the criteria, we talked about the federal law, we talked about the state law and the list of criteria. Those are all basically the same for a commission. There's an additional limitation for the hybrid and independent commissions that further limits the ability to take incumbents and political parties into account. But there are already some limits on that for the council too. And in a nonpartisan electoral system, it's kind of a question how significant that really is. But that area is that little additional restriction. But otherwise, they're following the same rules. They have to comply with the Equal Population. They have to comply with the Voting Rights Act. They have to follow the 4 mandatory criteria: contiguity, communities of interest, identifiable boundaries, compactness, all of that stuff, just as the council would have to. So again, I'm mindful of the time. I know I've kind of gone through this quickly, and so maybe there are people who have questions. I'm happy to answer them, but I don't want to kind of drone on. So.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris. Let me just ask the city clerk if we have any public comments.
No, we do not.
Okay. Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is new to me. I apologize. I just want to see if I'm understanding correctly. We are in a position to choose one of these 3 commissions as our process, and that's it. That's what we do. Is that what?
Well, no, as I said, the default is actually for the council just to do it.
Right.
That's still an option. I see.
Yeah, the commissions are not legally required. It's just a additional option. The council could maintain, as they have done in the past, the process. And on both pages 6 and 7, we've outlined for a timeline for the council maintained process.
Thank you. And one other is that with any of these options, any public member can submit a map.
That's right.
They're all the same in that way.
That's right. And in fact, I think Doug's the one I've heard say it. In some respects, commissions, with the way we've set it up now with all of these online mapping tools, anybody can be their own commission, right? They can already make their proposals to the council. So, I maybe consider that the additional option. But yes, the mapping, the ability to submit maps is required for any of these options.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Yes, the process of dividing the city up into districts was something that I opposed and really wasn't as involved as I should have been in the map making. I realized that I made a mistake, that if it was headed in the direction of being adopted, then maybe I should have participated more in the map making. I won't make that mistake twice if in fact it remains a council decision. I think that districts for Encinitas are terrible. We were formed, we were incorporated as a city with a certain amount of parochialism already between the 5 communities, Olivenhain, Leucadia, New Encinitas, Old Encinitas, and Cardiff. And what happened with the 4 districts is that you kind of divided all of those areas up. And what we ended up with is in fact a big chunk of Old Encinitas is part of the Cardiff district, which I think is unfortunate. That said, I think that, it's pretty clear we're going to be moving forward with this redistricting process and continue to vote in districts. And for me, the right approach is to turn it over to a commission and let that body, independent redistricting commission, decide. I note that Carlsbad, took the direction of the independent redistricting commission as well. And I think that is the right way for Encinitas also.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Moscow.
Well, I'm happy to see that Deputy Mayor Kranz is consistent with the desire to not have districts. But I did want to make sure that we're clear on this. None of us actually favored districts. We all liked at-large, the at-large situation that we had. But because of a lawsuit and the fact that the law had changed in California and said that at-large situations were in some way discriminatory, and there's been no case law that has opposed that. It forced us to move to districts, and we did that not that long ago. So the question here is not about whether we have districts or not have districts. So I just want to make sure the public's clear on that, because we're not being asked to do away with districts and go back to an at-large situation. We're being asked to adjust the lines because new census data has come out. Even though we just basically put these districts together only a few years ago, and they were put together really well, the fact remains that they were put together with data from 2010. So we said that we had a population of about 59,000. The demographics and I think it's already been kind of said or alluded to, indirectly said, that it's the city pretty much looks the same from one part to the other. So it's not like there's disparate groups throughout the city or something of that nature. And so it's not a complicated task here to put this together. We drew the districts not that long ago. We did a very good job. And so I think that we can do the same thing, which is essentially adjust them from 59,000 to 63,000 or whatever that's going to be when it comes in. It may be a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower. And so it's kind of rounding off in some of these districts. But we'll see. I'm open to the feedback that we get. Again, I believe that we did a great job the last time. And I think going forward, I think that the city council should hold on to this task and move it forward. Our timeline is not, we don't have a ton of time. We did it in a shorter amount of time before, but I think that if we want to stay focused on the goals of transparency, openness, and having as many public opportunities for submissions and engagement as possible, I think we need to be a bit efficient with this process as well. And so I would say that we basically move forward with the schedule that's outlined with the consultants' help, and that we put these districts together and we task our consultants and our staff with having as many opportunities to engage the public. People are busy and there's a lot going on right now, and we need to think about new ways of engaging people and bringing them into the process. You know, we don't want to have maps that are submitted that are completely unbalanced. And how do we basically rectify that? Maybe we're basically doing more to educate people about the process, and so that they're able to submit maps that make sense. Maybe we're helping them more so that whatever philosophically they're thinking can actually be effectualized in these maps, and they can kind of make sure that their viewpoint is represented in that map. And, you know, having forums like we had at the Cardiff School, you know, just multiplied throughout the city. I would love to have a couple of those forums. You know, some of your dates are around, you know, kind of summer into fall. We got to be careful that we're not trying to engage families, especially in my part of the city, when people are, you know, pandemic, you know, now kind of almost past it. People are traveling, they're out and about, and so we have a lot to compete with. And so I just want to remind us of that. And so the other thing too is that I think we should keep in mind is that just going with the consultants and the process that we've had before will cost us about $180,000. It looks like it could be double that if we had some other process like a commission. So that's another reason why I just don't think that it makes sense. You know, this is, again, this is not Los Angeles. This is not San Diego. We don't have disparate groups that we have a problem, you know, having representation on our city council. You know, however you draw the lines, the same representation is going to exist. And so I think that we're basically moving the districts a little bit based on a 3,000 or 4,000 person increase in population. So I think that it makes so much more sense to go forward with this process and make sure that we're just really trying to bring out as many people and welcome them into this process as possible. So, Madam Mayor, whatever it's appropriate, I'll make the motion that we basically go with the process laid out in the agenda report, which is the staff, the city council working with the staff and the consultants, and adhering to the timeline that has been posted in the agenda.
Okay. Councilmember Hensy.
After hearing Councilmember Mosca describe it in that way, I'm leaning towards that default option as well. Hearing that the cost could be as high as $360,000 to go with an independent commission is just, considering we did this so recently, doesn't seem like the best use of our funds. And I like the fact that going with the default option allows the all-inclusive way of doing this, where every member of the public is equally invited to take part, submit their maps, and take part in the conversation. Something that we did for the census, Pat Piot and I worked together on that to try to get as high subscribership to the census as possible, was that we engaged trusted partners to get the word out that the census, you know, people should participate in it. And our partner was Universidad Popular from the San Marcos Vista area, and they did a really great job. I think of using their communication channels, using their technology, using their relationships with our residents, and also helping Pat and I figure out, you know, how to get the word out with the population of folks who are really busy, don't always have time to attend meetings late at night, you know, stretched on time. So I hope that we can engage a trusted partner again to get feedback from those groups that are a little harder to reach. And, you know, we have quite a few that participated in our community grant program, Los Angelitos, and I know the Baile Folklorico has a great reach here in Encinitas. So just working closely with the communities and trusted partners is part of our strategy I hope to engage.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you, Mayor. I am very excited about what I've heard tonight about the public engagement and the schedule. I think those are all just right spot on to what I would expect, and a process that will work well. I'm most concerned about that public engagement, as Councilmember Hensy says, just making sure we've got the right tools in place to reach the broadest spectrum of citizens as possible. And I heard you present that there are some new tools that you have available for public outreach. And so I'd be curious to learn what those are, but I also am excited to hear Councilmember Hensy's idea about how she's worked with our staff in the past to reach out. I like the idea of being streamlined and not spending a lot of our resources, especially since we've just gone through this process recently. So I'm in favor of the recommendation as presented for the council-driven process. I'm anxious to learn from our constituents what's important as far as learn, first of all, what our data is and if it's changed, but also learn from our constituents what's important as far as looking through their lens on how they want to give input into the mapping. So I'm excited about going forward with the process.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to round two, I'll just weigh in that, it does seem to me like the commission process is more time and resource intensive than needed, and that we had a good process and it was very much involving the public, and the public all, just as Councilmember Hinsey said, all basically had the same ability to participate. And that if we up that commitment and everybody can participate and our outreach is really robust, it seems to me like that will be a great process that will result in maps. I mean, there are many different ways to get to good maps. I think that's what I thought in the last process, is there are so many different ways these maps could be drawn. And it's really interesting to hear the report from Chris that said if we had gone in strips so that every district had some coast, that would have probably resulted in the most change being required. Because I remember thinking conceptually like, oh, it'd be great to give every representative the coast and the inland. And so we did look at those, but then it destroyed all the communities, that historic communities of Encinitas. And so that was pretty quickly abandoned. But, it's interesting to kind of think through those things. So yeah, I would be in support of Councilmember Mosca's motion. But we'll go now to the second round of comments. So Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so I don't think any maps are great if a third of one of the old communities is part of the other district for another old community. So, and we know that there was politics involved in the making of those districts. So I don't consider that to be great. That said, here's an opportunity to rectify that. And I think that the important thing for the public is to have a process that is the least political possible. And in order to do that, it's give the decisions on the maps to a separate body. So to me, that I think is an important thing. I also would like to point out a couple of things to correct the record. We were not sued. We did not district as a result of a lawsuit. We got a threat letter, and then we decided to throw in the towel without even any kind of pushback. Even though there were some indications we could be successful in a lawsuit, there was a decision, and I think not totally unreasonable, that there were, it would be expensive to pursue. So in the end, I would have I was inclined to at least push back a little bit, not just roll over. And so I was wondering if Chris could speak to the situation with Santa Monica. It's my understanding that they did not roll over on Mr. Schenkman's letter, and they pushed back and won in the preliminary round in court. And I believe it's on appeal right now. Is that correct?
Yeah. So they lost in the trial court pretty heavily, and the court, I think, awarded them, the plaintiffs, $25 million in fees. But they appealed and they won in the Court of Appeal. So, that also wipes out the fees. And it was a good decision. And if that decision had stood up, actually, it could have benefited Encinitas too. But the California Supreme Court agreed to take it. And so that wipes out the Court of Appeal decision, and the briefing is ongoing. We don't know which way it's going to go at this point. So the Supreme Court could agree with the Court of Appeal, in which case Santa Monica would have won, but they could also reverse it, in which case Santa Monica is probably looking at $25 million.
Bill, yeah. So do you anticipate a decision in a year? How long do you think it'll be?
It's hard to predict. The courts of appeal are pretty good about, being a pretty consistent schedules. The Supreme Court sometimes will take a case and they'll sit on it for a while. The briefing should be done fairly soon. I think we're up to the reply briefs being due pretty soon. But there's no limit then on how long the court can take to review the briefs. It could be a year, it could be 2, it could be a few months.
And will there be oral arguments?
There will be, yes.
All right. Well, it'd be good to have some follow-up on that, if possible, from the city manager. Maybe Chris, since you're connected to it and probably watching it pretty closely, if you could keep us posted, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting, that case too, that in Santa Monica, this is at least my understanding, was that the council were all homeowners, but the city was like 70% renters. Mm-hmm. So part of the issue around districting was creating districts that would represent the renters. But of course, Santa Monica has a lot of money as well. So 25 million in one legal bill, that's pretty hefty.
That is, even though they got a lot of money, that's a lot of money.
Well, that doesn't count what they paid their own lawyers, which, they hired Gibson Dunn. Those weren't cheap either, I'm sure.
Wow.
Yeah. It's interesting that we're even talking about that case at any length, because I think it just is a testament and confirmation of the fact that we made a really good decision several years ago. And I think it just highlights the fact that we made a really good decision, because otherwise we would be in protracted litigation with no light at the end of the tunnel and huge legal fees. So I think that's just not a situation that we need to highlight, because it just demonstrates that we were just wise beyond belief when we made that decision.
Or we might.
Anyways, I'm going to move. If you want to talk about Santa Monica more, we can talk about Santa Monica more. I think it's just not.
We might not have been sued at all.
Well, we could talk about Santa Monica more if you want to dive into the details of that and Huntington Beach and others that have not had good decisions.
Yeah, we could have not been sued.
But you know what else we could do? We could sue HCD, and we could see what happens when we get involved in litigation with the state.
We should. Or
So
we should at least push back.
We have a motion on the table.
We do.
I have a motion on the table, so I will restate my motion again, which is to move the staff's recommendation for a council-directed action or process.
And to approve the timeline, correct?
And to approve the timeline and the activities outlined for public outreach, and to task them with coming up with even more outreach and more ways of reaching out to folks in our community in ways that Councilwoman Hinsey was talking about and Councilwoman Lyons was talking about as well.
Okay, I'll second. So let's go ahead and vote.
Councilmember Hinsey? Yes. Councilmember Lyons?
Yes.
Councilmember Mosca?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Kranz?
No.
And Mayor Blakespear?
Yes.
Motion carries with Deputy Mayor Kranz voting no.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chris, and the others who came tonight to talk about this.
Thank you, everyone.
We will look forward to the next meeting on this topic.
Good. Thank you.
So let me get back to the agenda here.
So next, Mayor, is informational items, which we have none. Council member initiated items, which we have none. So that takes us to council member reports pursuant to AB 1234.
Okay, thank you. Any reports pursuant to AB 1234? Nothing to share about the Delmar Bluffs, Deputy Mayor?
Technically, no. If you want to know, I did take a walk. I got my 10,000 steps walking those bluffs with closed-toed shoes and a hard hat on. And I was with Dwight Warden and Tracy Martinez and other tours are going to be provided to avoid Brown Act conflicts, and everybody's getting a real good sense of some of the challenges and what the view shed impacts might be, and how this will go. I was a little surprised. There are a couple of sections that already have fencing up, so there are people who maintain that it's a fenceless corridor, and it's just not true. I was also amazed at some of the old infrastructure. The footing of the former pedestrian bridge over the tracks is still on the bluff, and a couple of the big wooden members are on the east side still, and pretty impressive. I think Del Mar has some challenges fiscally with coming up with strategy for allowing crossings, not totally unlike the city of Encinitas and some of the fiscal challenges, the cost of just of implementing, the safe crossing. So, but my hope is that ultimately we can get to a point where the public has some access. The other kind of crazy thing about the situation there in Del Mar is they talk about it being a beach access issue, but the reality is that they have gnarly bluffs in that stretch that are, only the hardy can make that trip. I would no more take those bluff trails down to the beach than I would fly to the moon. Young people like Kelly might be able to make it, but it was pretty nuts to see some of the people that were traveling those trails.
So the opposition to the fence is for like these really, really hardy people. It's not, you're saying it's not like the general public that's walking down these trails.
That's not totally true. There is just general opposition because of the, certain, the information that's been presented is a 6-foot high chain link fence with concertina wire on it. And it's kind of gotten spun out of control. There's an upper bluff there that those houses sit on. And, there's a significant drop between the upper bluff and the track. So the reality is that, it's remarkably unsafe for people to be accessing the bluff in that way, let alone the railroad track. And while we were on our walk, there were countless times people were walking right down the middle of the railroad tracks. And, it's the easy way to go, but it's super unsafe. And so, there's a real challenge that we're trying to deal with, and the Coastal Commission and the City of Del Mar and NCTD are committed to working together to try and come up with a solution that everybody can live with, and we expect to have that decision by the end of the year.
All right, well, seems thorny. Yeah. Okay, any other AB 1, 2, 3, 4 reports? I don't see anybody raising their hand. So I will adjourn this. Well, let's hear if there are any attorney reports or city manager reports or city clerk reports.
No, nothing from city attorney.
Nothing from city clerk.
Okay, let's have a city manager report on when we're thinking the first in-person meeting might be. Oh, we can't hear you. We cannot hear you.
We're so excited that we're going to be opening up next week, June 15th. And depending upon the governor's orders, we will look at possibly having an in-person meeting later, our last meeting of the month, but we'll know more on Tuesday. But City Hall will be open, as will our Community and Senior Center and our Cali Mag Public Works offices.
Okay, well, thank you for that update. So we will adjourn this meeting in honor of our beloved former colleague, Jody Hubbard, who passed away a couple days ago. Oh, that's a sweet photo. That was the one that was hanging in City Hall of the council. Of course, you see Jody there. But this was before Joy came on board. And so Jody was elected in 2018, and she served almost 2 years. And she had been a very involved community member before she was on the planning commission, and then she ran for city council, and she unseated an incumbent in her District 3, which includes Cardiff. And she ran on and championed environmental commitments and mobility improvements, especially protected bike lanes, and policies that were compassionate. So she felt very proud to have supported the parking lot for people who had lost their homes. She was very good at helping her neighbors with their smaller problems with the city government. So like when there was a code problem or there was something that somebody was trying to get done and was having a red tape or something, she would help them, and people always felt very grateful for that. I think that she had also just an infectious smile and laugh. And so whenever you were around her, you felt positively. She was open about having lung cancer, that she was a shock to her. And she never smoked, and she didn't grow up in a smoker's household. But her sister had died of lung cancer too 20 years ago. And so her poor mom, has lost both of her daughters to that, which is just really tragic. And so she went on to hospice for a short time, but it was, it was basically a year from diagnosis to her passing, which just happened this week. So we're adjourning in her honor and wishing her family well and all of those who loved her. So with that, we are adjourned.